Welcome to Casting Recalled, brought to you by Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Casting Recalled. I'm Charlie Weiss, and I'm joined by co-host David Goldman.
Hello, Charlie. Great to be here. I'm really excited to finally get this podcast kicked off. An idea you and I have been playing around for almost 30 years.
Yeah, before podcast was reality. Back then, all we could have hoped for was getting a radio show together. But here we are. So to kick things off, let's begin by explaining to our listeners that Casting Recalled is a podcast dedicated to the supporting cast of all of our favorite TV shows. Each episode will focus on a supporting cast of a specific show.
And for our first show, we chose one of the most beloved TV shows of all time.
Yeah, Thursday, Friday, Happy Days, Saturday, what a day, rocking all week with you. A show that took us back to a simpler time. So first up, Happy Days.
We made it. Our first show. We're off and running.
So this is it. This is the one that we're starting off with, Happy Days. I think it was a good one to start off with, but a tough one. It was we could have picked a show with a lot less seasons. We could have picked a show with a lot smaller supporting cast, but I think we kind of had to go with something that everybody knew. So that's where we came up with Happy Days. There's nobody who didn't watch this back in the 70s and 80s, especially starting on reruns. Did you watch it as a kid?
Oh, I watched it all the time. I think right from as early as I can remember, I was watching it. You know, as I was watching these shows and reliving kind of these moments, watching them, it really I remember a lot of these episodes vividly. But you know, it's sort of like in the recesses of your mind, and going through this process of researching this was really a lot of fun and brought back a lot of great memories. So I'm really excited for this first show, and starting out with Happy Days, like you said, is just. There's no show that was more beloved and wildly popular. So
everybody wanted to be the Fonz.
Oh yeah.
It was there wasn't that much content on back then. There wasn't a whole lot on that we didn't watch, and whether if we were going for a half-hour sitcom, it didn't matter if it was Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, All in the Family, The Jeffersons, whatever it was. We just watched it and kept rewatching it. That's it. Reruns for me started with Star Trek on Channel 11 WPIX every night at 6 p.m. And Happy Days, unlike shows today, when Happy Days went into reruns, they were still on the air with original episodes, so they rebranded the show as Happy Days again, and that's what we used to watch. I don't really remember if it was on every night the way Star Trek was, but it was on all the time. And who knew it was like watching episodes of MASH. I didn't know if I was watching season 2 or season 8, but it was on all the time. And we like most shows, it just found its footing and continued to we got to know the characters better and better as the years rolled on. So
yeah, no, it's funny because today everybody watching TV or content really is a completely different exercise. Back then you sort of scheduled your life around, okay, Tuesday night I can watch Happy Days, it's going to be followed by Laverne and Shirley, it's going to be Three's Company, and on and on. And then each week you just had that expectation. That's when you're watching, because there was no recording, there was no DVR, there certainly was no internet. And so things have changed dramatically, but it was fun.
I was a kid in the 70s. It was really all just biding time until the $6 Million Man was on anyway. So, all right. So let's start off. We'll do a little bit of background here, a little bit around the origins and the history. This show was originally developed as a segment of the comedy anthology series Love American Style, and the episode was called Love and the Happy Days, which introduced Richie Cunningham as played by Ron Howard, and Anson Williams was playing Patsy Weber, and the only other original cast member in the show was in the episode was Richie's mother, who, just like the show, was played by Marion Ross, and there was a bunch of other characters, but none that made it over into the pilot. And I think what happened was that the original pilot after this Love American Style episode actually wasn't picked up, and that's when they had to go back and retool it and add in Ralph Malph and Ed and Fonzie, but essentially this one episode off of Love American Style was spun off into the Happy Days series, and it aired from January 15th, 1974 through September 24th, 1984 on ABC. Total of 255 half-hour episodes spanning 11 seasons. And it was Fonzie and Richie, the stars, left at the end of season 7, I think. So that left another 5 years that they had to fill in and keep the show going, which, was common then. It's still common now, even when major characters leave. If the show's got some legs to it and can continue to draw audience and sell airtime, they're going to find a way to keep it on, and that's what happened. But
yeah, I actually, in my research, I was looking at back to when it was a pilot, and as you said, it didn't get picked up initially. And I gather Love American Style had sort of a reputation of being sort of a dump where scripts that didn't make it past the pilot would end up there and end up as a segment of that show, and obviously was picked up later. And I think really they built a lot on some of the nostalgia that people had around, like, there was American Graffiti, which came out not long before that, and had Ron Howard, of course, and Cindy Williams, and that they saw the popularity of it, and then it gave a lot of more interest at the network to maybe dust off the pilot and actually make a show of it. At the time, Grease was also on Broadway and a huge hit at the time too. So the whole 50s nostalgia, period piece idea, they thought really had legs from those, from that show and from Graffiti. So off they went, and we know the rest is history.
Just hearing the tune brings me right back. I mean, who didn't know that opening tune? Sunday, Monday, Happy Days. It brings me right back. This was Gary Marshall's baby. He was, I think, like most of the inventors of content back then, he was coming from a perspective of how do we get past, get out of this mindset of the Vietnam War and go back to a simpler time of the 50s, and when TV was simpler and there was a reflection of home life that was simpler and just a calmer time, a safer time. And I think it was probably a ballsy move to say, let's make sure that we build this story around the 1950s instead of modern day, which was the 70s. And it wasn't that crazy. I mean, it was only 20 years later, right? I mean, Flash forward from Happy Days 20 to 25 years later, 1995 was when Pulp Fiction came out, and Tarantino knew exactly what he was doing when he had Samuel L. Jackson go correctamundo. I mean, it wasn't that much of a stretch. It wasn't a deep cut to pull the viewer back to 20 years prior, 20 to 25 years prior with Fonzie saying correctamundo and anything amundo. And I think that's what they were trying to do, was just kind of pull the country back just a short 20 years.
Yeah. I think, that makes a lot of sense. If you think about in 74, when they first launched it, Nixon Nixon resigned in August of that year, and then Ford had pardoned him at the end of the year, which was hugely controversial. So I guess we could sort of relate it to it in a way, the way the environment is today. But imagining, a simpler time has broad appeal at any point.
It wouldn't take much to pull me back to 20 years ago. Actually, you go flipping through cable channels and pulling up a movie from 20 years ago isn't that hard. We were just watching The American President, and I couldn't believe that movie was from 95. I mean, it feels like it was just yesterday that came out. And when first season of Friends, when they were writing so well for Chandler, for Matthew Perry, he does this reference in one of the early episodes, and I think it was Phoebe who asked him some question, and his answer was, no, Dee, the obnoxious sister from What's Happening. And I mean, that, again, not quite a deep cut. It was only 15 to 20 years before that What's Happening was on, in the 70s. But I mean, that had to, made me laugh my ass off. It's not that hard to pull the viewer back, and that's what Gary Marshall was trying to do. The interesting move was to set it in Milwaukee as opposed to Friends, which was Friends and Seinfeld were New York centric shows, and so much is New York and LA based. And if you remember Laverne and Shirley. That's what they did when they felt like they
Yep.
had to reinvent the series. They picked up the entire cast and moved them to LA
Right.
out of Milwaukee. But this was set in the 50s and 60s in Milwaukee, and they presented this idealized view of post World War II Middle America,
Yep.
seen largely through the eyes of high school students and later college students of Richie Cunningham and his buddies, and then eventually, the Fonz kind of took over in terms of popularity. So a bit of background. So Gary Marshall, there was nothing that they wouldn't have given him the keys to at this point. I mean, he had already proven himself. He had already done The Odd Couple, which was wildly successful. And this is. This was like the Wild West before, when cable hit in the early 80s. It was the Wild West. We had never seen that amount of content. We had never had our hands on that number of shows and movies all at once. This was a much simpler time when we were limited. So all we could do was just flip the channels, and you could catch the rerun of Rockford Files if you wanted the hour-long drama. You could catch the rerun of Happy Days if you wanted the half hour, or you could hold your breath till 6 p.m. and then either watch the news, because you certainly weren't getting it off of your mobile on CNN.com, or you could, mindlessly tune into WPIX and watch Star Trek again. So we just kept watching the episodes over and over again. Gary Marshall went on to be a wildly successful director. He vacillated between drama and comedy really well. He did Nothing in Common, which was a real, yanked at the heartstrings with Jackie Gleason and Tom Hanks. And then he did Overboard with Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell. And then he moved into Beaches and Pretty Woman, which could probably like the top of his career. But on TV, he in those few years, look at what he accomplished. Odd Couple, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, and of course, Happy Days.
Yeah, I mean, by the 78, 79 season, he had 3 of the 4 top TV shows, all of which were on ABC. So Laverne and Shirley at that point was number 1, and then Mork and Mindy and Happy Days were literally tied. And then in between there was Three's Company, so which another show we watched, constantly, and we'll definitely cover that in a future episode.
Says a lot about the American intellect that, the height of popularity, number 1 show was Lenny and Squiggy.
I know. You compare that to now, you think like these complex dramas, Ozark, Breaking Bad, whatever, these very sophisticated, complex, violent, and a lot of sexual content, whatever. The world has changed so dramatically, whereas, as you said, like this becomes the most popular, and it's fairly innocuous. But
Would Robin Williams walk onto one episode and take over the television landscape in 5 minutes of ad-libbing?
Yeah, we'll cover that more later. But yeah, it's a remarkable story. But yeah, anyway, go ahead.
So it had the iconic theme, right? Rock Around the Clock, which was Phil Bailey, and sung by a studio chorus. And starting in '76, they replaced Rock Around the Clock as the beginning of the show. It was sung by the pop group Pratt and McLean, written by television theme writers. These guys named Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox, who also wrote theme songs for Wonder Woman, Laverne and Shirley, Love Boat, which everybody, the whole world watched. And they knew what they were doing. They had also composed "Killing Me Softly" with a song, which became a big hit for Roberta Flack and company. I think it won the Grammy later that year. So, and on the music front, by the way, was that Anson Williams and Scott Baio, Chachi and Potsy, both walked out of the show with record deals based on their work from the series.
Yeah,
that shit would not go down today. All right, so the point of this show is the supporting cast, and I brought one clip just to show you, just as a surprise here. I gotta play this.
He's debonair. He's suave. He's sophisticated. He's a regular pussycat.
Fonzie with thumbs up action it goes. Comes with a Fonzie garage complete with Fonzie's hot rod hoist and tools. And all of Fonzie's friends.
His hot rod hoist and tools.
Ralph. Potsy.
Plus the Fonzie's best cycle that spins, spins, spins. They're all here in one complete set or sold separately. The Fonzie Stunt Cycle, the Fonzie Garage and Hot Rod, the whole crew from Happy Days, and the one and only Fonz himself with thumbs-up action that goes. Hey!
Gonna have to track that kid down who kept going A and beat the shit out of him with Fonzie thumbs up action. It's not a real thing, but okay.
Yeah,
So
I don't
that's,
recall that toy at all, but
They had everything. They put together the garage for Happy Days. They put together the transporter room for Star Trek. They whatever details they could throw in there, as many characters as you could buy. That was the whole thing, was sold separately or together. Your parents put it together. As much money as they could buy, they proliferated the shit out of these shows. I'm sure that they had one for Laverne and Shirley too, and had a little Carmine Ragusa doll with a big afro. So yeah.
a cool jacket
So, and a cool jacket.
with the big ragu in the back.
So, all right. So we're gonna work through who makes the cut, who qualifies as supporting cast. So the first segment of our show each week will be what we're going to call the DeForest Kelley, Dr. McCoy category, which is just somebody who's just too much of a lead actor to be qualified as to qualify as supporting. And of course, it was Ron Howard as Richie Cunningham. Of course, it was Henry Winkler as the Fonz. So anybody else that doesn't quite make the cut for a lead?
I think with the Happy Days cast, as we go through them, there's so many strong characters and so many, but they all sort of, to me, are just below those two.
Yeah.
Ron Howard by design. I mean, Richie Cunningham as a character, going back to Love American Style, that it was always intended to be a lead. And actually, Potsy was also at that point considered a lead, and then that changed when they went to when they moved it to the series. But to me, both of those two characters for sure would be the lead.
Poor Potsy. Eventually Richie and Ralph leave, and that poor bastard's relegated to working in Howard's hardware store. That's it. The guy had like 5 lines over 5 years after those guys left. So that's it. So everybody else qualifies as supporting cast. So let's work through them. We've got and this is, you flash forward 10 years to the years of the likes of Cheers, and Norm and Cliff and arguably Carla. They're supporting characters. Like, they're supporting Sam and Diane. They're not supposed to ever grow to be the stars of the show, but you run a show for 250 episodes, and invariably we're going to get to know all the supporting characters better, and we're going to get to know more about them, and the actors are going to be given more of a chance to really shine. And I think occasionally, to your point, the strength of those characters can shine through so hard that eventually you get a Kelsey Grammer as a Frasier who, can only stay supporting for so long. At some point, the audience is tuning in just for them. And that's what happened with Fonzie at the beginning, was that he clearly was not supposed to be a lead character. And Henry Winkler just, he caught lightning in a bottle around the country, and they had to build the show around him and Richie, which is why they eventually got rid of the older brother pretty quickly on. I guess we'll get to that later too, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think that when for us, and each time we do an episode, we're really looking at the body of work over the whole period of time the show ran. So to your point, Charlie, somebody may have started as a supporting actor and ended up being a lead, like in the case of Henry Winkler. The other could happen as well. So we'll
but not Potsy. Potsy just stayed Potsy.
Well, he thought he was getting a big part, and then he found out.
That's all right. He laughed fine. All the way to the bank. He was on all 11 seasons, and he aged better than everybody. So he definitely got the last laugh. He was his last name in real life. Anson Williams' last name was Heimlich. He was a second cousin to Dr. Heimlich, or Henry Heimlich, the Heimlich maneuver guy. Called him uncle, and just, I mean, this was his big acting gig. Like after this, he did very well directing. He directed Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Charmed, Baywatch, which, you know, had a billion viewers worldwide. Beverly Hills 90210, Melrose Place. So I mean, he did just fine in the director's chair, but as an actor, this was his big gig. And what's really nice, I did a little reading on him, and like many others, he credits Marion Ross as his mentor. She was the one who took him under her wing, and you know, she was a class act, and he still talks about that today. And I read about how he, I think, still lives a few doors down from her. So they were neighbors and still are. And the other piece about Anson Williams is that very successful businessman, having nothing to do with the entertainment industry. Reminds me of Mike Nesmith, you know, from the Monkees. He, you know, those other three guys, Peter Tork and Mickey Dolenz and Davy Jones, got together for years and years. They kept doing, you know, tours. I saw the three of them at Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey in the 80s, in fact. And, you know, you always wanted Mike, and what happened to Mike? Yeah, Mike was doing just fine. He had plenty of rolls of quarters in the bank, because it was either him or his mother invented, I'm going to get this wrong. It's either whiteout or the yellow sticky pads. What do you call those?
It's Whiteout.
Whiteout.
I think it is Whiteout.
Yeah.
I read the same.
I think it was his mom, like Mike Nesmith's mom. So that's what Anson Williams did. He did really well as an entrepreneur as well. And there was something around cosmetics, I think. And then he also opened a chain of diners across this great land of ours called Big Al's, that he anchored off of Al Molinaro, you know, obviously from this show. So
I think it was one other thing about him I thought was interesting too. That was related to the music that they played in the jukebox in Arnold, and that they would actually re-record the songs with him rather than using the original recordings to save money.
Yeah, it didn't cost him anything that way. Yeah.
So very clever.
They bought him an extra. They threw an extra $25 into his paycheck, and yeah, I mean, how much did they save? So every song on that jukebox was sung by Anson Williams. But he could sing; he could carry a tune. As opposed to, I don't think I'm going to make the same argument for Scott Baio. Erin Moran actually could sing; she could hold a tune too.
She absolutely could.
So that was Anson Williams, and here I've got one. Let me pull up one quick clip from him.
Well, let's try playing Splish Blast. That'll really get him. Okay, guys?
All right, Potsy.
Let's go. 1, 2, 3.
Splish splash, I was taking a bath. Long about a Saturday night. A rubber dub, just relaxing in the tub, thinking everything was alright. Well, I stepped out the tub, put my
You got 5 other band members pretending to play instruments.
I know.
Splish splash, I jumped back in the bath. Well, how was I to know there was a party going on? There was a splishing and
He was having a ball, though.
Oh yeah. He was a natural, you know.
Oh, I guess Ralph's really playing the sax, right?
Actually, his fingers aren't moving, even though the notes are
Maybe not. And the drummer in the background there.
Bing bang,
Yep.
I saw the whole gang dancing on my living room rug.
Somewhere between 25 and 85 years old.
They was doing the bop, all the teens had the dancing rug.
All right, there you go. I just want to know what's with the gold lame lapels on all of them. So this was at what was the lodge called?
The Leopard Lodge.
The Leopard Lodge.
They wear those beanie hats, and
we the viewers had 11 seasons of invariably watching some, you know, musical production that was either at the Leopard Lodge, the Cunningham's living room, or usually at Arnold's, and always somewhere off to the side at a table was Howard and Marion giving Howard that, you know, sort of, you know, doting wife sort of look, like, oh, you know, Howard isn't everything about life spectacular, and him grimacing over at her like, I should be getting paid more than you, Marion Ross.
Yeah.
All right.
So why don't we want to move on to Donnie Most?
Ralph Mouth.
Ralph Mouth, yeah.
Which
So
I thought growing up was Mouth. I thought it was Ralph.
so did I,
Mouth,
up until
Mouth. I still can't say it right. I still trip over my tongue. Yeah, I thought I thought it was, so it's Mouth. Malph. Yeah.
Yep. I think I discovered that about a month ago when we started looking at this. But he, unlike Anson Williams and Ron Howard, who were already on the original cast and loved American Style, Donnie Most actually came out to audition. And it's interesting because obviously Ron Howard and Anson Williams took the same role in the show, and yet Donnie Most came out to audition for both of those roles. Ultimately, he didn't get them, obviously, but Gary Marshall saw, he saw the value of including him in the show and created the Ralph Mouth character, who really is a joke teller and a bit of a wimp, right? But it's interesting to me that he even let him audition. I mean, perhaps he never saw Love American Style, but if he had, he would have seen that they already had those roles, and perhaps they didn't release who was actually going to finally get the roles. But in any case, he took the Ralph Mouth role and made the most of that. So I think a couple of
He needed
things.
cheap talent because he was still writing checks to Tony Randall.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a couple of things about him that stood out to me. One is that as not only the sense of humor, always cracking the jokes, but incessantly stating that I still got it. And to me,
I still got it.
Let's play the video of that.
You'll love my moose burgers. They go down very nicely.
Yes, but do they stay down? I still got it.
Hey guys, how do you get in a coffin?
It's easy getting in. Getting out's the hard part. Even in panic, I've still got it, huh? Wait a minute, Rich. I want you to meet Claudia and Darlene.
Hello.
Yeah, they work at the Bluebird Diner.
Some dishes, huh? Dishes? Diner, get it? Yeah. I still got it. You know something, Leather? You may have a nail in your heel, but you've got a lot of soul. I still got it. I still got it. Yes, even in retirement, I still got it.
So he still got it. Well, he had it. But I thought it was interesting. Saying something like that to me would be something a middle-aged person would say after reminiscing about years of telling jokes. But he's supposed to be a high school student, so it's sort of awkward that that's the phrase he came up with. But he used it all through the show. And
Everybody got a phrase.
absolutely.
Yeah, you weren't. You hadn't made it until you were given a tagline. Yeah, every one of them. That was the days of Gary Coleman saying, "What you talking about, Willis?" You weren't. You hadn't really made it until you were given a catchphrase. And then once you got it, especially on shows like this, they just jammed it into every fucking episode. Doesn't like and there were the viewers like we couldn't wait to hear it. Like I
couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah, no, you had to tune in because Fonzie was going to say something amundo. So yeah,
exactly. But so the other thing I noticed just observed about Ralph was that he was really a wimp, right? So anytime they had a confrontation with a gang, of course Fonzie would bail them all out inevitably, but he was always so spineless, and it made for good comedic, content.
He was great. He was really lovable.
Yeah, exactly. So there was one episode I thought kind of captured, as well as any episode, sort of his spineless nature and so on. So in the second episode of the third season, there was an episode called the Motorcycle, and the premise of it is that Ralph goes out on a date, and then he leaves the date at some point and wants to go tell Richie about it. So he drives over to Richie, which of course makes you wonder when did that date end. That it was early enough for him to go see Richie, but nonetheless, he drives over and apparently drives over Fonzie's motorcycle, which is parked in the street instead of the driveway where he normally parks it. And then he panics and backs over it and whatever and smashes it into a million pieces. And of course, the rest of the episode is Ralph panicking.
That little shit from the commercial fixed it in Fonzie's garage. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Exactly. So basically, the whole thing culminates. He's trying to deal with it. He's going to leave town. He packs his bag and goes at one point. And finally, the whole Cunningham clan said, "Look, you got to face it. And you got to tell him." So they all help him out by having him come over to the house. And they tell Fonzie, you're going to help Joni with a magic trick she's working on, where she's going to tie you up and then get you out of the rope. So he goes along with it, even though he's steaming over the motorcycle. They tie him on the chair, and then they let Ralph in to finally confront Fonzie. So this is how that goes.
Oh, so they got him tied up in the Cunningham's living room.
I gotta get some more tire tracks.
Well, you see, Fonz, I have a confession to make. I lied.
Yeah.
I'm not really Jewish.
No kidding. Will you hurry up, please? The tracks are waiting.
Fonz?
Yeah.
I don't think that you have to take any more tracks. We think we know who it is who bumped into your bike.
Hey, Mouth, you found out who did it?
Tell him, Ralph.
Yeah, come on, Mouth, tell me who did it. That guy have tire tracks all over his body.
Well, Fonz, wait. You see, this guy is willing to help pay for damages and make amends.
Hey,
That guy, this guy that I'm talking about, the guilty party. Please don't kill me, Fonz. Please don't kill me. It was an accident. I was temporarily insane. I didn't mean it. I'll never do it again. I'll move away. Just let me live.
You know, Fonz, it takes a very big man to look you right in the eye, and say that.
Well, how about it, Fonzie? He's willing to make it good. Forgive and forget, huh?
What do you say, Fonz? Pal?
I'm gonna kill him.
So I just think that I just found myself laughing the whole episode.
I want to buy Howard's sweater with the elbow pads. Hey, so they're adorable. You could see that they were having a really good time together. And every time I've ever seen an interview over the years, Anson Williams and Donnie Most are always together in the interviews. They stayed friends all these years, and I think it's. I don't know if they ever did episodes together of Love Boat and Fantasy Island, but like at the same time. But they definitely stayed friends over the years. How great must that have been to have done that stuff in your early 20s, late teens, early 20s, and stayed friends for 40 years after that?
Oh yeah.
It didn't always work like that. Like,
No.
particularly back in the day where everybody was, today ensemble casts, everybody stays friends. Literally the Friends cast, those three girls, as women in their 50s, is it Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox and Lisa Kudrow? Like they're really tight. I think the whole cast is tight, but that stuff didn't always happen back then. You're still reading stories about how the Star Trek cast was at each other's throats and fighting for the spotlight and going to the producers and directors and making sure that you got more camera time than your leads or your co-stars. These guys clearly were having a ball together. I think you got to give credit to Gary Marshall for casting so well.
Yeah, and that those relationships and friendships permeate through the acting and the relationships on screen and as well as off. So Donnie Most, after the show, he had a lot of trouble, and not surprising, getting other roles, particularly dramatic roles, just because he was typecast as sort of the Joker and so on. But he did make appearances on Chips, Baywatch, Love Boat, of course, Star Trek, and others. And even later on Glee, he played, I guess, Ginger Supremacist, Rusty Pillsbury, which I'm not a Glee fan, so yeah. So that's Donnie Most. So let's talk about Pat Morita.
My man, Mr. Miyagi, who went on to do The Karate Kid in '84 and actually got nominated for an Oscar for The Karate Kid, the first one. He started out as a stand-up comedian, and this was originally known as the hip nip in nightclubs and bars, which there's something that you could not get away with today. And he was all over the place. Not only was he, I remember him in Sanford and Son, and I remember him vividly in MASH back in those earlier episodes. That was the funniest part of MASH, those first few years with Trapper and Henry Blake, McLean Stevenson. And back then, he I don't know if you'd call it a recurring role, but he was certainly on more than a few times. Sam Pack, and but his big break was playing the owner of Arnold's. His name was Arnold Takahashi, and his first run before leaving and then coming back was the first 26 episodes between 74 and 76, and then he came back again in the early 80s when they shipped Al off to do Joni Loves Chachi, and this guy was. He was. There was nothing not funny about this guy. He was charming, and he was all over the place. He went on to do, Magnum PI and Murder She Wrote, and Baywatch, and actually he had his own hour-long drama, like a kind of a cop show called O'Hara, in the late '80s, maybe '87. 87, 88, and so he could do drama, he could do comedy, but yeah, in 1984 he did The Karate Kid, and that was his big thing. And he had a scene. Karate Kid was directed by Avildsen, who did Rocky, and he had a scene in Karate Kid that I guess maybe the producer wanted to cut and the director fought to keep it in, and it was the scene of him. I didn't think it was a particularly great scene of the movie, but it was him drunk, and it was, Ralph Macchio's character, Danielson, hanging out with him, kind of consoling him as he was, smashed. And that was the scene that he was nominated for. He didn't win the Oscar, but just getting nominated, that's a big deal from the guy, the diner owner from Happy Days, like, just a few short years later. And he died pretty young. He died in his early 70s. And the rumor is, they say it's natural causes. He was 73, but there's a rumor that there was some alcoholism that, kind of carried him over that threshold. And so he died in 2005. It's too bad because that's a guy who, at 90 would have still been rocking it. He could have still held my attention on screen. I mean, he was Mr. Miyagi, for Christ's sake. He was the best, and him doing that bah laugh in the diner on Happy Days, and I mean that just never went away. He was all over the place. He was everywhere.
Yeah, no, he's great.
He was a Gary Marshall special, and Gary Marshall found a way to plug him in everywhere. So when they brought on Al Molinaro to play Al, he went off to do that's the whole thing, is what qualifies as a spinoff, what qualifies as a reboot, what qualifies as just a crossover. And it wasn't a spinoff of Happy Days, but it was a crossover, and that's a stretch to call it that, but a crossover from Welcome Back, Kotter. So his deal was that he was going to play Mr. T, and the show was called Mr. T and Tina. It was a colossal failure, by the way. And I have a clip of him in Mr. T and Tina. Here we go. This Drek is what he left for. Here's the best part. Here we go. So he's playing somebody who emigrated to the U.S. He's got 2 kids, and he hires somebody named Tina, a younger woman with like a Julie from the Love Boat short haircut to to kind of help raise the kids or whatever. And then the best part of this is Ted Lange from pre-Love Boat days comes in all of his 70s glory as the kind of Schneider building, I guess, superintendent or some kind of a repairman. And he was in, he was intended to be in all the episodes. So you got Ted Lange and Pat Morita.
I'm not out of it. What's out of it is your belly button.
Mr. T, all the girls are wearing things like that.
Sorry for the VHS quality.
Notable exception. I forbid it.
Oh, Papa, that's gross.
What is this gross?
It means it's the pits.
Thanks to you, my children now speak 3 languages: Japanese, English, and pits. Come in.
Here we go. Here's Ted Lange.
I found Minxie's hat. It was rolling down the sidewalk. I had to chase it 3 blocks.
This isn't Michi's.
Oh, no wonder that old mama got mad when I took it away from her.
good to see Isaac and Arnold in a sitcom that nobody's ever heard of called Mr. T and Tina. So he was on and off the show. They managed to squeeze him into the last episode, so he never left. But he was the man. So here's Arnold in all of his glory. Here's a little clip.
See, I speak Japanese, Chinese, Korean, a little Hungarian.
Well, tell me something. What do you consider yourself?
Ouch.
Good looking. See, Richie's got to fix up this Negro guy. Now, do you know anybody? Oh, not me. You got the wrong color. You should ask Sammy Davis Jr.
Come on, Laverne, they don't need us.
Hey, hold it. Nobody leave.
You write this stuff? I always thought the kids did it.
Oh, the kids not funny. I write the good stuff, bring in the crowds. Yeah, see, look at this. Want a good time? Call Emma. I gotta run now. I gotta get back and rip off my tongue. Bye.
So here's the thing: is that Pat Morita played Arnold without an accent in rehearsals, and then Gary Marshall goes over to him sheepishly and pulls him aside and says, if you wouldn't mind, can you play him with some broken English? And he agreed, and he mimicked a Chinese accent based on a Chinese restaurant owner that he knew. And that was it. That's how he came up with that. Just the absolute generic Asian. That was what he was going for. He was a stand-up comic. He had timing like nobody else on that show. I mean, he was perfect. He was a lot of fun to watch. That Mr. T and Tina, by the way, only ran 5 episodes. It was just a disaster. But you're offered your own show, you're going to leave and do it.
You got to take a shot when you can.
He when he was performing stand-up as a comic. It was Red Fox who discovered him and gave him a role on Sanford and Son, a recurring role called Ah Chu. You can just do whatever you want with Ah Chu, and and that was it. And that was how he got placed. So in terms of supporting cast, you looked forward to seeing him. He was a good time.
Yeah, no, I really have great memories. He was phenomenal.
All right,
well, Mr. C. Let's talk about Mr. C. So of course, playing Howard Cunningham was Tom Bosley, but initially it wasn't. I guess Gary Marshall was really looking to see if he can get Harold Gould to play the role, and Harold Gould's really known for a couple of roles. One as Martin Morgenstern from Rhoda, and then later on for the Golden Girls as Miles Weber. But I gather.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking for a second. I was thinking Elliot Gould. No, I know
Harold Gould,
white
right.
hair and on Golden Girls. Yeah.
Exactly. So he turned it down, and then when they offered it to Tom Bosley, initially he turned it down too, because he was worried that he just thought that, and I guess this happened with a couple other supporting actors too. They found that they're worried that it was too simplistic, and they'd be working with teenagers and sort of a teeny bopper or whatever type of show. But then when he read the script, Tom Bosley really liked the whole father-son relationship he would have with Richie, played by Ron Howard. So ultimately he obviously signed on and did so for the entire 11 seasons, and very much beloved, a real paternal presence obviously in the show, not just to the family but Richie's friends, Fonzie really as well.
He was America's dad.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he certainly was on the near the top of the list, and so as a character he was generally pretty patient and whatnot, but of course had his own
was this after Brady Bunch?
I think so. Or
it was, right? Brady
overlapped
Bunch.
a bit.
Yeah. I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah,
Just 'cause, I mean, that was
60s,
another that was another television's. I mean, this is before Cosby. I mean, these were America's dads.
Yeah.
This was
absolutely. Well, you had you had Leave It the Beaver and
but that was all
Father
60s.
Knows Best and all that. But that's what people were thinking as America's dad, right? It evolves, right? So anyway, so he was anyway, so he as the father figure obviously was a pivotal role in the show, and had a great chemistry with Marion Ross, not initially, but ultimately they really
they
had
didn't
great
get on so
chemistry.
well at the beginning,
No.
because she had the temerity to actually, have some lines and do something other than just say, "Oh, Howard." Yeah.
Yeah, and that took time. I mean, in the beginning, and I gather he wasn't really a big fan of her having more lines. And there's always egos, especially when you have a cast as large and talented as this. But ultimately, that changed as well. So, but I found a couple of interesting scenes that sort of exemplified his paternal figure, but also the anxieties he had with dealing with certain things. And one of them, those episodes was when Fonzie finally he moves into the apartment above the garage at the beginning of the third season. When you look back at the very first season, Fonzie, it's not the characters all evolved tremendously from that point. It wasn't he didn't have the whole and whoa and all that stuff. It came with time and development. But from at that point in the show, Mr. Cunningham really saw him as like, okay, he's a nice guy, but he's still sort of a hoodlum, and let's keep him at arm's length. And then all of a sudden now he's going to be moving in. So the show really is about the give and take of that.
I'm thinking, like, I'm not letting my son's friends move into the upstairs attic apartment of my garage, but whatever. Yeah.
Exactly.
69 to 74. Brady Bunch was on through 74. So Robert Reed was ending America's Dad, and this guy was just becoming America's Dad.
Right.
All right. So we move on to From Mr. C to Mrs. C. Marion Ross playing Marion Cunningham. She's the oldest living cast member from the original cast, she's still amazing. She came out with a book a couple of years ago, sort of autobiographical, but she was nominated for it wasn't an Oscar, it was a Golden Globe for her performance in The Evening Star, which was the sequel to Terms of Endearment. So, you had the whole world go out to see that movie, and there she was in a really major role opposite Shirley MacLaine. So, I mean, she wasn't. She did get jobs after Happy Days, but she was very much the glue that held the show together. I mean, she had a relationship with every character. She was somebody that Anson Williams, Donnie Most, Ted McGinley all said that she was their mentor, that she took them under her wing, and she had this relationship. On the whole world tuned in to see Fonz every week, and she was the one who had this relationship with Fonzie. She was the only one who could get away with calling him Arthur. And every time she kissed him, he smiled ear to ear in this kind of adorable, loving, very maternal way. I mean, and that was something to watch. She owned that role and built it into something. And considering that, like, she could have just been, just kept
part,
in just relegated to this sort of back corner, no lines, no role mom. They wrote for her, I'm sure not in the beginning, but they really wrote for her. One day earlier on in the series, she went to Gary Marshall, and I've read this, and I've seen her talk about this on interviews, that she went to Gary Marshall and said, hey, what can you do about getting me and Tom, meaning Tom Bosley, some more meat, some more, dialogue in the shows. And he said to her, I'm sure very respectfully, he said, it's not about you. It's about the boys. Show's not about you. But, that notwithstanding, think about that show midway through, the chemistry between her and Henry Winkler, the way that she interacted with all of Richie's friends, with all of the co-stars that built up. She rocked. She was very much a central point for, like, an anchor for that show, particularly as it sort of kept motoring on in its last 3 to 5 years.
And she really had great comedic timing, and it really came out as the seasons progressed, and she built the character and the sophistication of the dialogue. She just had a way of juxtaposing her maternal, persona against all these, kids, so to speak. I say that in quotes because they're all like 25 and 30 years old in real life, but But it was really, I found it really entertaining watching her, kind of confront like Fonzie, like you said. That's like the key one. Nobody messes with the Fonz, and she completely cuts through all that. She can call Martha and does. Nobody else is supposed to ever do that. And he has no, she's his kryptonite, and it was just fun to watch those scenes.
Here. I pulled something up for you. Check this out.
So there's no Halloween party for you? Tomorrow you go to the hospital and that's final? Fini? Kaputamundo!
Don't mess with Marion.
Never.
Yeah, I'd be more afraid of her than Howard any day of the week.
Oh yeah, and she looks like she's like having such a great time doing that role, especially those kind of parts where she's basically goofing on all Fonzie's expressions, and it's very entertaining.
All right, so we got Mr. and Mrs. C, we've got Potsy and Ralph, and we've got Arnold. So moving on to Big Al.
Yep, Big Al. So Al Molinaro, born as Umberto Francesco Molinaro, was played. Actually, he got his acting chops on TV, at least, as police officer Murray Greshler.
Yeah, he was Odd Couple. Yeah.
So he was already Gary Marshall on the Gary Marshall show. So that was sort of his foray into getting up to Happy Days.
Yep.
Yeah, and the way he did that. Really, after I think 4 or 5 seasons on Odd Couple, Jack Klugman wanted to go out and do a dramatic role, which ended up being Quincy M.E. But Gary wanted to bring him on because Pat Morita was moving on, so to take over as at least the cook at Arnold's, and so there he came on board. It's interesting. There's a couple different stories around how they found him, and a lot of these recurring in the sense that Penny Marshall, obviously, who's Gary's sister, was taking acting classes, and Al apparently was in an improv class with Penny Marshall, and so Penny introduced Al to Gary, and that's one story. And then I heard another story where a writer friend of Al's, John Rappaport, who knew Gary Marshall was looking, and he knew Gary Marshall was casting for Odd Couple, that he pointed him to it. But nonetheless, one way or another, that's how they connected the dots. Al was actually on Happy Days for about 10 years. And then he was on Joni and then Joni and Chachi. Joni Loves Chachi for a couple of years for the time that was, and then came back. So he was a staple of the show. And ultimately his character evolved to go from being a cook to actually be a part owner with Fonzie later on. And so so that was, how he evolved. And then ultimately he marries Chachi's mother, Louisa, who's played by Ellen Travolta, John Travolta's mother. And then he ended up being Chachi's stepfather, Fonzie's uncle. So it was sort of an interesting way that the character evolved and as it related to the other characters on the show.
They had to write about something.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but it fit really well. And that character, you think about him, and he seems depressed all the time or down, and he's always saying it just like yep, because he's something that he regrets or wish he had done. And the one thing that he really pines over, one person who you don't meet until very late on, it's his long lost love, Rosa Coletti.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you about Rosa Coletti?
Of course, he talks about it incessantly, and so there was an episode later on where Rosa Coletti actually comes on, and he confronts her, and he's all excited to meet her again. And apparently, Al's mother has been trying to track her down for Al for 20 years, and so at this point, Al's going to. So the episode's called "If You Knew Rosa," and what the premise is that Al's mother sends him a letter on the 20th anniversary since he last saw Rosa, and his mother's been searching for her and sends Al a letter saying, "Hey, I couldn't find her," and so this is how it goes, and he's sort of out of his mind when he's at that point.
I always dress this way, Al. Well, I didn't. Oh, yeah? You gave me this shirt for my birthday, remember?
Well, you shouldn't have taken it. I just told Clarence to hit the road, and, you could be that stupid. Just shut up and shame out.
I'm going to jump ahead. So the Fonz then confronts him about it.
I'm just sick and tired of incompetence around here, that's all.
What came in the mail, Al?
Nothing.
Don't lie to me. Your nose will grow.
I don't need any of that.
All right, let's see what turned you from Jekyll to Hyde here, huh? All right, dear Sonny boy.
Oh, it's for my mother.
No kid. Encloses your weekly allowance.
She likes to do that.
75 cents?
It's going up to $1 in June.
Sorry, Sonny, but no good news. As you know, the 20 years is up. Life has dealt you a dirty blow. Yep. Love your mama.
Fonzie, you remember once I mentioned Rosa Coletti?
Once? About 1,000,000 times, huh?
Well, after she ran out on me, I just said to myself, I said, Al Del Vecchio, you gotta be strong. You can't waste the rest of your life waiting for some woman to come back to you. So I decided I'd give her 20 years and then forget.
Al, you are a brick.
So it progresses where Rosa actually shows up, and then she's sort of a free spirit, and she does want to settle down with Al, and he gets his, it gets closure.
He gets the happy ending. He gets Ellen Travolta.
Yeah, ultimately he does. And actually, in this episode, he's initially set up with, I think, Chachi's aunt or something like that, and then he sort of blows her off because he's just obsessing
It's
about
probably
Rosa.
where they came up with the idea when they were carving out Joni Loves Chachi.
Exactly. It's ultimately he calls the aunt at the end and tries to get another date out of it. But so Al was, that's basically encapsulates what Al was about.
This is my favorite part. Sorry, what? Oh wait, what? Am I sharing my screen?
Now you can.
Here you go. Watch this.
Well, have you made an executive decision yet?
Oh, of course. Al, this Encore lasagna is delicious. I love the way it's made. So rich, so meaty. I'm going to take some home.
Wait, didn't I tell you that Encore is a 2-pound family-size entree?
Right.
Is that too much food for one person?
Right.
Then don't you need a family like mine to help you eat it all?
Wrong.
For tasting more, it's Encore.
Not exactly the most classically good-looking actor, is he?
No, well, but he looks like the Italian guy in the pizza box,
I know,
so.
But if this was 2020 on the CW network, this fucker's not getting cast. Yeah.
Oh no.
None of these people. They're just in the meantime, he looked like he was 70. He was 40 at the time. A guy lives, because I remember him dying a few years ago, and I was reading about it. And I mean, just a few years ago, he was 96. Guy dies at 96. So, I mean, how old was he back in the 70s?
Yeah, no. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Cool.
Gotta love Al.
Mm-hmm.
The Encore commercial. All right. So next up, Scott Baio, Charles Chachi Arcola. So, and by the way, because everybody's a relative of everybody else's. So this is Fonzie's younger cousin, comes on at age 12, and he's later becomes Al's stepson because, like you said, Al married the mom. By the way, Scott Baio moves on after this series to be in. After Happy Days goes off the air, I don't mean Joni Loves Chachi, but after Happy Days goes off the air, he moves on to Charles in Charge, which he did in the 80s for however many seasons that was, I think about 5. And who's on it playing his mom is Ellen Travolta. So there you go. It just,
what's old is new.
So he comes on. He's 12 years old. He's got this monster crush on Erin Moran, who's maybe, I think, 6 or 7 years older than him. I mean, she's got a good 6-7 years on him, I think. And they wind up dating in real life for a little bit, behind the scenes on the show, which is weird. He's all about Joni, calls her Blue Eyes, and is always chasing after her, going wah wah wah, and she's always calling him shrimp and drip, and that's how it went until they got together in the last episode of the whole series. At the end of the 11 years was Joni and Chachi getting married. But he was the guy. I remember the ABC the sports what was it called when they
Wide World of Sports.
No. It was like the TV stars on the.
Oh, Battle of the Network Stars.
Battle of the Network Stars. Thank you. Yeah, and he was like the athlete of those years. They had these obstacle courses, and he was the guy who flashed through and beat everyone every time. He just smoked through those things. But so he was the team beat.
The heartthrob of the
heartthrob,
show, right?
yeah, hung up on every high school girls or middle school girls wall, and he was. They gave him his catch line of "wah wah wah," which he just did all the time, and he arguably carried that show's success after after Richie left. I mean, he was. It was a good cast. They did a good job casting this guy, and he was working on that spin-off, which we'll talk about, Joanie Loves Chachi. He co-starred in the movie Zapped with Willie Ames, who was still on. I think he was still on Eight Is Enough at the time. Yeah. Sure. And then he and Willie Ames moved on to do Charles in Charge. 6 seasons it ran. And so, I mean, they all just kind of traded places all over the place. This guy, you talk about like who kind of wins for best career. His odd political views aside, because he turns out to be this, sort of unpredictable advocate for Trump, 100 years later. But all that aside, this guy went on to do 6 seasons of Charles in Charge. Then he goes on to do at least, I think at least 3 or 4 seasons of Diagnosis Murder with Dick Van Dyke. Then he goes on to have a ton of guest roles on many different shows, and then he gets a walk-on role for with Henry Winkler on Arrested Development, which I think Ron Howard
he was on it as well. Yep.
Yeah, was on that episode as well. And then went on. He got another series called See Dad Run. He had at least a couple of reality shows on VH1, and the big thing about this guy, Scott Baio, was that he was offered the role of Maverick in Top Gun, and he turned it down. Which
Oops.
It was a stellar career move. Apparently, Tom Cruise did okay with that one.
Yeah, just a little bit.
So that's Scott Baio. He could arguably have had the best career of anyone ever involved in this show if you take out Ron Howard's directing. If you think about all the continued acting gigs, but he was.
Yeah, no, you certainly can make the case. And then there's Aaron Moran, so sort of complementing that. So I'm not going to dwell on Aaron Moran's problems and so forth. You really just want to celebrate her character. I found that a lot of this show is all these kids, students, whatever, coming of age, and so when you look across those 11 seasons. In the early season, she's so young. She's 13 years old when the show starts. And then, of course, it concludes with her getting married to Chachi. And so now she's, 24 or whatever, So quite a long stretch of time. But her comedic chops were really kind of impressive if we really look at it. And as a young child, she was always, needling Richie and trying to get information out of them and trying to stay up late and all the stuff that you'd expect a younger sister to do, I guess. But she played it very well. As I watched these episodes, I found like it was very entertaining. She definitely held her own and a pretty strong cast. So she actually got her start. She was originally born and raised in Southern California, and she did some commercials and was had some television experience before she even got to.
I was confusing them. I'm sorry. I was confusing them. They were the same age, Scott Baio and Aaron Moran. So sorry. What were you saying?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Now I was just saying she had actually a fair amount. She had stints on several shows like The Waltons, Family Affair, My Three Sons, Courtship of Eddie's Father, Gunsmoke. So she actually had a fair amount of television experience at that age. That's pretty remarkable. And then ultimately, she obviously gets the role on Happy Days, which really what she's most recognized for. And I gather Anson Williams was instrumental in getting her on the show. And I guess they had been worked on a different show called Lisa Bright and Dark back in '73 that they worked on together. And so he advocated for her, and then of course she became part of the cast. I do want to show, as Joni. So I do have a montage, which actually part of it is Joni in the early years, and it progresses through, but it also shows the play between Joni and Chachi, so you can see the Scott Baio, Aaron Moran chemistry through the time. And it went from, as you said, this he was always chasing her, pursuing her, and she was always resisting, with pretty clever lines. And then obviously it became more of a romantic relationship that culminated in the marriage and a separate spinoff. So let's have a listen.
Hey, Blue Eyes. I'm delivering a kissogram for Joni Cunningham. Stamp it and return to sender.
Ah, Snow White, you're a vision of loveliness.
Well, the eighth dwarf, Pushy.
This is your last chance. You gonna go out with me?
Maybe.
Al, guess what? I got a maybe!
Chachi and I have finally done something that we've wanted to do for a long time, and I hope you approve.
Will you marry me?
Oh, Judge.
Oh, Judge, what?
Oh, Judge, yes!
You are perfect.
Sweetheart, I have never seen you look more beautiful.
I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride.
Getting married by Aldo Vecchio's brother or cousin, something, who was a priest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
there's Ron Howard back for the episode. Yeah.
Yeah. National.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll talk about their spinoff in a few minutes. So massive supporting cast that it continues to be. Ted McGinley comes on. They ship off Chachi and Joni onto their spinoff, and so they got to replace them. So they bring on Ted McGinley and Kathy Silvers, right?
Of course. When in doubt, bring Ted McGinley in.
Yeah. 5 years he was on. Let's see, season 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, so maybe 4 years. I don't know, something like that. So and they're all relatives. Well, no, Ted McGinley is Roger Phillips is Marion's nephew, and is Marion's nephew, and then Kathy Silvers, Jenny Piccolo. They talk about Jenny, she referenced her friend Jenny Piccolo, who was always getting her in trouble for years, for the first, handful of years of the series. And then we finally get to meet Jenny Piccolo, played by Kathy Silvers, who's Phil Silvers' daughter. Phil Silvers actually does a guest appearance on one of the episodes. I mean, he was as famous as could be back then. And McGinley, was on everything, is still on everything.
Still on everything.
Yeah. He Love Boat, Dynasty, Married with Children was on for except for that first season, he was on for the full run of Married with Children. West Wing. The guy he's aged well, and he's never left the screen, and he's done a ton of film as well. Nerds. So he's another one, by the way. Talked about Marion Ross as his mentor, and then moved on to the Love Boat. It was really, everybody knew everybody back then. You go from the Love Boat to Fantasy Island to, Dukes of Hazzard to Happy Days, Joni Loves Chachi, Laverne and Shirley, and Mork and Mindy. It's one big circle. So they brought the two of them on to build up the cast. Not after Joni and Chachi. I meant to say after Richie and Ralph Malph leave, and they left in the 7th season to go off to the army. So that's when they bring on Jenny Piccolo and Roger Phillips. And Roger's big role is as the gym teacher. So they got to find a place for him. Jenny Piccolo is as and her role grew too over the last few years of the show. I was thinking of two more, which is Crystal Bernard and Billy Warlock. So that's what happened, was that in seasons 9 and 10, they write Joni and Chachi off. They spin off, which was the big thing back then. If at all possible, do a spin off, make more money that way. So they got to replace those characters. And that's where Crystal Bernard and Billy Warlock come in. So Crystal Bernard is Howard's niece, Casey, and Billy Warlock is Ted McGinley, Roger Phillips's younger brother, Flip Phillips, who his signature, I don't think he had a signature catchphrase, but his signature outfit was that he always had a half shirt. I don't remember if it was a sleeveless shirt, but it was always a half shirt. And then and Crystal Bernard, went on to do Wings on NBC that was her big claim to fame. And she could sing. She was a
she, like gospel, I think.
Yeah.
She sang in her church.
Yeah, she's a gospel singer. She was she's got a sister who's an actress, Robin Bernard, who could also sing. And she was on Popular Storylines on what was who played the younger Hardy Boy?
Oh God.
Not
I don't remember.
Yeah, it'll come to me in a second. So she was on a popular storyline on the sister Robin Bernard on General Hospital with the younger Hardy Boy, Sean Cassidy.
Oh right, sure.
Yeah. And so they were brought on for a year. It didn't really work. So that's what bolstered up the cast. Ted McGinley as Roger Phillips, Kathy Silvers as Jenny Piccolo.
And the guys that dragged me out were the cutest guys I've ever seen. Strong, too. Jenny, I don't care about that. I am very happy with Chachi. Oh, sure. Sure, care only about yourself. And I thought you were my friend. I am your friend. Great. Then join the Rondells. How does that help you? Because they don't want me, but they're dying to have you join. So I figure you tell them you'll join, but only if they'll take me too. What do you think? Why would you want to join a club that thinks you're garbage? That's because they have standards.
There you go. Oh gosh, Jenny Piccolo. I mean, it's just funny because all she did was reference her friend Jenny Piccolo for however many seasons. They kept talking about the troublemaker friend, and Marion and Howard would talk about the troublemaker friend. So yeah, she was good. She was from a family of actors. It's hard to make something of that material. So, between her and Ted McGinley, they didn't carry the show, but they certainly made up for a bit of loss, and kept some momentum going.
I think about it in those later years. She was probably the one I remembered the best. I think she made the biggest impression because she really
Jenny Piccolo.
Yeah, because she filled the void, a character that, like you said, you never saw, but it was net new. When you looked at Ted McGinley and Crystal Bernard, they're filling huge shoes that ultimately they couldn't do.
Well, they weren't going to replace Ron Howard.
No, absolutely not. So, but Jenny Piccolo was just Jenny Piccolo. So, and she did a really nice job, Kathy Silver. So
I'm sure she wound up on the Love Boat too. Actually, we'll have to check.
We'll check our list. We'll check our passenger manifest.
Yeah. Ask Julie, the cruise director. So, massive supporting cast. A handful of honorable mentions. You had Linda Goodfriend was Lori Beth, who played Richie's girlfriend and then wife, and she eventually made it to the as a series regular. She was in the opening credits, and Linda Pearl. Nothing wrong with the character. The whole point was to get Fonzie to kind of grow up a little bit, and Ashley. So she played Ashley Pfister, who came on. I remember it vividly when they were like bringing on like a serious girlfriend for Fonzie, and she was, professional, and she was a single mom, and she had the daughter. What was the daughter's name? Shit, I can't remember. She was played by Heather O'Rourke from Poltergeist, who unfortunately passed away very young. It'll come to me in a minute. Yeah. So and then any other honorable mentions besides the Leather and Pinky?
No, those are the ones I had left.
So, Roz Kelly played Pinky Tuscaderos. She was supposed to be a series regular, and this was before the whole, growing up. And she was, this motorcycle chick, and the pink boots and the pink helmet and the white short shorts, the Daisy Duke short shorts. And she was Fonzie's partner in the Demolition Derby. And what was cooler to watch than the Demolition Derby? And she was the one who was brought on to like be his equal, because she could handle herself, on her motorcycle, and in crashing cars, and in the end, it was a disaster. They didn't get along on set. They even as a kid reading magazines, I remember reading about how they didn't get along. That was jarring to be however old I was, and to you've got these characters that are supposed to have so much on-screen chemistry, and then you realize that that they couldn't stand each other in real life.
Yeah.
So that was the Roz Kelly deal, and so they quickly pivoted. And what do? They go a completely different way, and they bring on Pinky Tuscadero's sister, Leather Tuscadero, and they went to look for the right person to play this role. And Suzi Quatro was had been seen worldwide, particularly in Britain. She was very young, and she was asked to audition for this part because she was really well known for doing rock, and she had this really highly rated hit called Devil Gate Drive. And I want to play a clip of this because I remembered it then, and I certainly remember it now.
I mean, she had this expression. She would like hit her hips and then like point her fingers like a gun and go pow.
Oh yeah.
And then there's a great clip of her introducing herself for that.
2, 3.
Erin Moran making it as a bop bop girl. Who was cooler than this girl walking onto the set as Pinky Tuscadero's guitar playing sister with a band, Leather Tuscadero and the Suedes, and she's decked out in black leather head to toe, just like Sandy at the end of Grease,
Right.
and comes on with like the coolest outfits, the coolest hair, just rocking through the screen. She was awesome. She had a following then. She still has a following for 60s rock. She aged, really well. She still plays, still looks great. Poor Roz Kelly didn't fare quite so well. She got arrested a few times after the show over the decades, and didn't fare nearly as well. But we're gonna put her in here as an honorable mention. She wasn't really a supporting cast, but it was great every time she popped up on screen. What I think is funny is that you've got this world-class band, and where do they wind up playing is Arnold's, on the 6-inch podium.
That was an A-lister.
Yeah. But listen, as long as you had Al DeVecchio cheering, and you had like Marion looking over lovingly at Howard, who had to sort of roll his eyes and harumph, you knew that you had made it to the big time.
Yeah. Well, I found a bit of useless trivia about her too. So her backup singers were called the Suedes, and one of them was Paris Hilton's mother, Kathy
Out of
Hilton.
here. Wow.
Yeah. Before she was ever married.
It's a big deal. Devil Gate Drive. So for our next segment, we've got our spin-offs and reboots. Which one stuck the landing and which died a quick death? So we've got the obvious ones, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy. Why don't you kick us off, David?
Sure. I think Laverne and Shirley, perhaps one of the greatest and most successful spin-offs in television history, and that's based on no research, nothing but my gut instinct. And but I think nonetheless, it was certainly one of my favorites. And
Well, it was
worthy
number
of-
one for a while.
Yeah, it was. It actually just barely eclipsed Happy Days when Gary Marshall was just on a tear, and so it just was. It's interesting how it all just kind of started. Penny Marshall, obviously, Gary Marshall's sister, and she was taking acting classes and whatnot. Not really well known at the time, and they decided
She had her bit parts on Odd Couple. You remember that?
Right, that's right. So she did
She was
have
like
you
a
know,
receptionist or no, something like that, with like the whiny, nasally voice. or
Sure,
something
which of
like-
course she carried over onto Laverne and Shirley, right? So, so Gary Marshall decided let's have an episode, bring her on along with Cindy Williams, who actually was on in American Graffiti.
Yeah,
and we all know that the chemistry they had was phenomenal, and you see it here before the network ever approached about Laverne and Shirley. In this episode where they have a date, the episode in season 3 is called "A Date with Fonzie," and it's just spectacular to listen to. So let's have a look.
Hey, the Fazio, they're here. All right.
Fazio.
Laverne, this is Laverne DeFazio, she's mine.
Shirley, it's all over her.
And this is Shirley Feeney, she's yours, as you can see.
Nice to meet you, Richie.
My pleasure. Hey, they're getting along pretty well, huh? Hey, planted here, girls, planted here. Would you like to sit down?
Yeah, for Posse, sticking your nose in.
Staring? How'd you like your eyes closed for good, huh?
You're too much, Laverne.
So, Cheryl, what do you think of this kid? You've been with worse.
Oh, he's nice. And a tie, too.
And a hanky. Is that for showing or for blowing?
Well, it's been quite an evening. What do you say we go to Richie's house? As soon as you feel comfortable with Shirley, you say, okay, Fonz, huh? And I will peel off of Laverne up to my little penthouse.
Okay, Fonz.
Hey, he says okay, let's go, Laverne.
Wait, Fonz.
Hey,
That's not
don't
exactly...
try to thank me. Thank me tomorrow, all right? You can thank me now. You're welcome. Hey.
Hey, how come we get the kitchen?
Laverne, come on, will you please?
Why did you and Laverne get into that fight, anyway?
How's that? Well, when Laverne and I went into the ladies' room,
Boy, she was
I walked
rocking
up
the
to her and
accent, huh?
I said, sweet as you
Oh, yeah.
please. Laverne, you have a mouth like a sewer, which she does. And she said, a sewer? And I said, yeah, a sewer. So she curled up her chubby little hand and
Fantastic physical comedy. Knocking Richie on his ass.
Oh, Richie, I'm so sorry. Oh, dear. Oh, here, let me kiss a boo-boo.
Wow.
Richie, we're home.
Watch Aaron Moran here.
Yeah, covering Joni's eyes. Yep.
Fantastic.
It's great to they that was the days of spin-offs. It didn't take much, but they had a lot to work with the two of them, and they built out that. I'm sure that we'll do an episode on Laverne and Shirley, and because I mean that's that really strong supporting cast, Eddie Mecca and what's her name, who was on really from the beginning. Betty Garrett played Edna, who eventually married Laverne's father, and I remember Betty Garrett so well from All in the Family. I can't remember the character's name, but yeah, she was part of that whole crew. So that was what? How many seasons did it run? I think 10, 11. No. I think maybe 8 seasons, I think, because they did the whole thing. They were in Milwaukee for 5 or 6, and then they moved to California for the last 2 or 3, and then we'll get into this on another episode. But it's crazy that the last season Shirley wasn't on the show. It was like Laverne and because Cindy Williams got pregnant, and I don't know, they couldn't work it out. I don't know if it's the producers or if it was a argument about the script or how they were going to write it in or whatever, but which is bullshit, because even back in the days of I Love Lucy, they wrote her pregnancy into the script, so they could have figured it out.
Sure. Absolutely.
But so yeah, that last season, somehow they had to like limp along without Shirley. Like that couldn't have been easy. Like,
No.
The show opening starts and it's just Penny Marshall and no Cindy Williams.
Well, when the show's title is Laverne and Shirley, and then you take out half of the named cast, that doesn't bode well for you.
when they fired Roseanne and they renamed the show The Conners. Actually, where they probably got that idea was when they fired Valerie Harper from Valerie. The show was just called Valerie. It was Jason Bateman, and they fired Valerie Harper after the first season, and so they renamed the show Valerie's Family for second season, and they bring on Sandy Duncan as the dad's sister. The aunt comes in because they kill off mom, and then they had a successful show for another 4, 5, 6 seasons, and they renamed it the Hogan Family. So which is more or less probably where the Conners came up. But
I was going to say that Roseanne changing to the Conners when she gets taken out of the show is just yet another example.
It's very watchable, by the way, because it's if you put political views aside, and yet you almost have to, it's the only show I can think of that was and still is focused on blue collar. Although I guess going back to Laverne and Shirley, that was their whole deal, right? I mean, it was the factory.
In a brewery, and
the brewery,
right? I mean, that's the whole thing. So, and just have the struggles they had, and just it was very much a working class.
I've been to downtown Milwaukee. It looks exactly like that.
Oh yeah. I went to school not far from there. Know it well.
So that's more. So that's Laverne and Shirley. What about Mork and Mindy?
Mork and Mindy, obviously, is the launch pad for, well, really, Happy Days is the launch pad really for Robin Williams, and the story about how they came upon not just him, but the whole story about how they developed the episode My Favorite Orkin, which is ultimately what he starred in, is just really phenomenal. The story goes that Gary Marshall went to take his son Scott to see Star Wars. So I guess around 77 or so when it came out, right? And after it came out of the movie, his son said to Gary, "You really should make an episode about an alien or a Martian or something like that." And he's like, "All right, yeah, it's not a bad idea." So they throw together a script.
Can you do that in Gary Marshall's voice? No? Okay.
No, if you can, go ahead. I know it's very much like a New York.
He gets mimicked all the time, even now by Ron Howard and Henry Winkler. They both do him. Yeah, it was very recognizable. He had this bit part, this like 2-minute part in Soap Dish, which was a Sally Field Kevin Kline movie about Sally Field being on this soap opera her whole career, and Kevin Kline coming back into her life after 25, 30 years or something, and they have a daughter played by Elizabeth Shue, and Gary Marshall's the show producer. No, Gary Marshall's like the network president, and the show producers is actually a fairly young Robert Downey Jr. who's fucking hysterical in it. But anyway, Gary Marshall's in there, and he wasn't acting; he was being Gary Marshall. And
but he's done bit parts in and out over the years too. But nothing more really than that.
Was he? Did he have a minute in Pretty Woman? I don't remember. Maybe
I don't recall. So coming in this alien idea, so they put together a script, and I gather the way Happy Days and probably most shows would be developed is that the cast would have the script of the current week and the next week's script, so they can start learning the lines. And so the cast looked at My Favorite Orkin script, which was going to be filmed the following week or taped, and they were like, "This is a piece of shit. It's the worst thing you ever saw." And Anton Williams comments about it, where I guess Henry Winkler was reviewing the script, and normally very calm and cool and collected guy, unlike his character, he said, "This is crap." And they're like, they went to Gary Marshall, "So you got to rewrite this. We've had such great writing. This doesn't hold up at all." Fine. He walks away.
You're going to make me freeze in the middle of Arnold's diner. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. Which ended up working out well. So the following Monday, I guess that was like a Wednesday, the following Monday, the week of the taping, they showed them the new script. They looked at it and they're like, "Again, this is shit." And I gather they had a different actor that I couldn't figure out who it was that played the role. It didn't work well. They taped it anyway by that Wednesday, and the actors were all kind of concerned about it. And in the meantime, they went looking for another actor to play the Martian. So Ronnie Marshall, which was Gary Marshall and Penny Marshall's sister, she was actually the casting director for
of course
Happy
she
Days.
was.
Yeah, he kept it all in the family completely. And so she knew of, she had heard about Robin Williams, and and Penny Marshall was in a class with him, I guess Harvey Lembeck's acting class or whatever, and they said, this is a guy you got to consider. So Gary Marshall said, fine, I trust your opinion, let's bring him on. And he comes in and he does the audition on the Wednesday, I believe, before the Friday taping. So 48 hours before, he comes in, stands on his head and does the whole audition standing on his head. And they're like, you can take that a couple ways. One, you're a fucking lunatic, get out of of here. Or, wow, this guy is unusual. And so he obviously got the role, and then he improvised the whole thing. So
I loved the whole thing. Yeah.
So the Thursday, the day before the taping,
I gotta wonder if Robin Williams was just coked out of his mind. But yeah,
it could have been, but whatever, it worked, right? On the Thursday when they did the camera blocking, whatever, the writers apparently were frantically. This is what Donnie Most and Anson Williams was saying. They were frantically rewriting the episode, and then recorded on Friday.
Chasing after this lunatic.
Yeah.
He couldn't have even been 30 yet, I don't think. It was before GARP. It was before all of that. So he was probably late 20s.
Before everything. It was before everything.
Oh my God.
And by that Friday they tape it. It's one of the most well-known and popular episodes of the whole 11 years. And within 4 days, they had a contract for Mork and Mindy.
So this was around 77, 78. So I would have been around 10. And I can tell you, I vividly remember, I couldn't wait, for the next week, Mork and Mindy. I could not wait. I was way more into Mork and Mindy, tuning into Mork and Mindy must-see TV than I was for Happy Days of Laverne and Shirley. I mean, what was cooler than Robin Williams playing Mork, the whole Mindy thing, the old grandmother thing, who kept cracking on Mindy's father. And yeah, I loved it.
That was phenomenal. I'm looking forward to covering that show.
We'll do a segment on that one too.
Absolutely. So I got a couple of clips here just to kind of relive the moment. So in the episode, Richie's the first one that encounters Mork, and he comes into his living room. He lands, I guess, outside the house, and he brings him in, and ultimately he wants to interview him because it's a great scoop. So the interaction is quite entertaining.
You know what's interesting about it all is, so you got Happy Days in Milwaukee, you've got Mork and Mindy in Boulder, you've got One Day at a Time in Indianapolis, you got All in the Family in Queens. It's interesting that they they made sure to get the cities around. Yeah, all right, so play the clip.
Unique, isn't it? What's the purpose of your visit to Earth? Purpose, recall. I am here to collect specimens for our sampling on our planet. No kidding. Does it? Anybody in particular? Yes. What, the president? Oh, no, not in Milwaukee. Are you going to take Hank Aaron? Hank Aaron? No. He is too famous. We would have to trade the entire planet for him. Oh. What we need is someone average. Humdrum.
Oh, I remember Humdrum.
I know somebody humdrum. Need a clue? I found my thrill. On
Blueberry Hill.
So obviously Richie's now the target for his experiment or his research. So fabulous, opening line. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. Actually, in Mork and Mindy, we'll talk about at the end of every episode, Mork talks to Orson, his leader, through some sort of technology to his home planet. That the first time you see that happen is actually on that episode, but I'll skip it for the moment. So Mork actually returns in a later episode because it was so popular, and he meets up with Fonzie, who he had confronted in Arnold's in that first episode, and ultimately has mutual respect for him because Fonzie offsets Mork's powers.
Yeah, he's the only one who could. Yeah, he's the only one who could stand toe to toe with the alien because he was just that cool. That the thumb was more powerful than the Shazbot. Yeah.
Well, as powerful, except that Mork eventually threatened to knock down the whole restaurant. So anyway, so Mork returns is another episode that comes later, and here Mork comes in. He really wants to. He's asking Fonzie for some dating advice. And again, the interplay is really phenomenal between the two of them.
Yeah. Wait, look. All right, a kiss. Very affectionate, you understand? You got a boy, and you got a girl. And they put their lips together, you see? And then they kind of slide them around. And they feels great.
Sliding lips sounds unappealing.
Don't knock it till you tried it. All right, now look. You gotta meet a girl, get to know her, find out if she's willing or not.
Do you know a girl who's willing?
I know some girls that are willing and able, and I know some that are not willing, and you're able to convince them, yeah?
Wow.
That would go over well these
One of
days.
the convincing ones.
It's going to be very hard.
But
Don't touch me.
Perhaps you'd like to slide lips then.
So
you just managed to offend the entire Me Too movement and the entire LGBTQ movement in one 30-second scene. Yeah, that holds up well.
Yeah. Well, give him a break. It was 45 years ago. But yeah. No, it definitely would not hold up now. So this episode evolves until eventually Fonzie's trying to figure out who Mork can go on a date with, and of course he comes up with a brilliant idea and he invites Laverne over. So again, now we're bringing Laverne in. We got Mork and Laverne interacting here, where Fonz leaves them, the two of them.
It's great. You don't see it as much anymore today. Like there's a little bit of crossover here and there, but you really don't see that much of it anymore. And it's brilliant because it draws eyeballs from one show to the next. It carries audience. But particularly, today when we're competing for digital eyeballs, it would be it'd be a smart move to start doing more crossovers. I mean, you don't see it all that much, a little bit here and there. The Law and Order shows a little bit, but I mean, I remember News Radio brought on Jerry Seinfeld for a minute for one episode just to try and drive more viewership, but he wasn't playing Jerry Seinfeld from the Seinfeld show. He was just playing Jerry Seinfeld. Like the crossover, and they did more spin-offs that weren't nearly as successful for Happy Days, and there was crossover even with that. Yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah. So here's Laverne interacting with Mork.
So, Morky. I'm not real good in geography. This off place, where is that, off Greece?
No, we Orkans have been off Greece for at least 5 bleams. Now for lubricants, we use Viz, Gage, or the ever-popular Limacook.
Of course.
Well, even then she had the L on her
I don't
shirt.
understand why we don't use Limacook.
Probably your engines couldn't handle it. They would either overload and pollute the atmosphere or destroy the universe as you know it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is it time to flatter you?
Sure.
You have a lovely fungus growing out of your head.
Fungus? What fungus? What?
Or fungus, or any major group of fungi, including mushrooms, mold, or mildew.
Yeah, well, I always wear mildew when I want to impress a guy. What did Fonzie do to me?
So.
Awesome.
Great
All right.
interaction.
So the deal was that this was so wildly popular that they clearly had to launch their spin-off, which they probably put together in 10 minutes, and it wound up eclipsing all of it in terms of popularity. It didn't have the staying power of Laverne and Shirley or Happy Days. I mean, 4 seasons if memory serves, but and they were losing ground by the second one. But that first season, Robin Williams wins an Emmy, which I don't think anyone ever won an Emmy on Happy Days. They did on Laverne and Shirley, but not Happy Days. So they had to rewrite the end of that episode so that they could, retcon the history of how he leaves Earth, and because he was just supposed to leave, and they wanted to do Mork and Mindy in the 70s, not the 50s. So here's how they did it. They redid the syndicated version was re-edited to show Mork erasing the experience from everyone's mind, and in that way the event had actually happened and it wasn't a dream. And so let me I'll play it real quick.
We need a new champion on Ork. We must now enter the time warp.
Hey, wait! Lloyd, you're not taking Fonzie! No, I can't let you do it! Why do you take him? You told him he was very fun!
Yes.
Fonzie, don't let him. You can stop him.
Whoa. All right,
I
so
released him when he revealed to me the secret of the universe. And here it is. First, tell that chick she's cool. Second, tell her she's got great zabobni. Sir, I'm coming back right now. You have a longer assignment for me? Earth, 1978? Shazbot. I don't want to be exiled to Earth. Yes, sir. Goodbye, 1950s. It's been boss.
And then it started.
yeah, it it wasn't that complicated to do. It wasn't that hard. They retconned the last 30 to 60 seconds of the episode when they were playing it in reruns, launched Mark and Mindy, and it went to town. All right, so we could do a whole show on them. Next one, Joni Loves Chachi, which has been talked about forever because it's the thing is that it's largely considered a failure, but the truth is, I don't know, 2 years. If you remember back, Three's Company, half the reason you tuned into Three's Company was for the Ropers, because what was funnier than Helen and Stanley? And and you tuned into Alice for Flo because she kept saying "kiss my grits" and she was funnier than Alice. And in the meantime, they were popular, but they didn't really wait long enough. They got them off those shows after the first season into their own spinoff because they were kind of the most popular piece. And so they're trying to make money and they spun them off real quick. Arguably it was too early. Neither of those spinoffs succeeded. Joni Loves Chachi, I don't know. It ran 2 full seasons. It had a full cast. It had Al DeVecchio go, marry Chachi's mother, as we talked about, Ellen Travolta, and they all moved to Chicago. They opened up their nightclub, and the whole point was that Chachi and Joni could start their new lives together. I think she was. I think they were both going to college. She was definitely going to college, but the whole point was to spin off their music career, and they were going to sing in this in this club that Al was going to run. And so you had the Art Matrano was played like he managed the talent there, and I think it was his daughter was part of Chachi's small band, and some dopey other kind of beatnik, and then there was Joni and Chachi. But so the way the music started, this is kind of interesting, is that the opening sequence to Joni Loves Chachi is this song, and it was actually born out of an episode. When You Look at Me, I think it was You Look at Me. That's what it's called, You Look at Me. And so Joni Loves Chachi, they re-recorded You Look at Me, and that was the beginning theme song to that show. And it was god awful, by the way.
No, he couldn't sing, save his life.
Couldn't sing for shit. And so that song came out of an episode where they towards the end they were gone from Happy Days on Joni Loves Chachi season 9 and 10, and then came back for 11.
Right.
So towards the end of season 8, they were on stage doing some kind of a Western show, and that's when they sang to each other, and it was a longer version of this song, You Look at Me, and it had more lyrics into it, and she belted it out. She was really good. I mean, certainly a whole lot better than we were given access to see. So I wanted to play the clip, not from, this is the song that kicked off every episode, of Joni Loves Chachi, but this was the original 8th season episode of Happy Days where they first sang it to each other. And she wasn't bad. She could carry a tune. They're on stage in the Western clothes.
Yep.
Something magic in the way you hold me in your eyes. No one ever warned me love just takes you by surprise. I don't know what's come over me. You've got me hypnotized when you look at me.
This feeling's not like anything I've known before. You're all I dreamed that love would be, and so
can't believe it's true. You feel the way I do when you look at me. You look at me.
All right, it goes on for like another 30 minutes, but the whole thing was like this was enough to basically kick off a spinoff. Just that one thing. You got to figure they both must have been given voice lessons, like
Well, especially Scott Baio.
Yeah,
her voice.
I mean, that was the best he sang out of the entire 2-year spinoff. Wasn't as good as that one episode on Happy Days. But first of all, can we just talk about the outfits? I mean, I get that they're doing some kind of a Western play on stage. By the way, the end of the song is, they start, they kiss at the end of the song and the curtain closes and it opens and everybody's taking their bow and they're still making out. And I guess that was when they decided that they were really in love. And that's when they decided that they could move off to Chicago and start a life together. But I just, Scott Baio in the red satin shirt that looks like it's out of the the roller rink episode of Charlie's Angels, ripping off of Cheryl Ladd. They should have been shot just for the clothing. But yeah, I mean, they I get it. I get how they pulled this off. It wasn't I don't see how you could call it a failure when it ran for 2 seasons and it probably got pretty decent viewership for those couple of years, and they must have cranked out at least 30-40 episodes over 2 years.
Well, if you look at the body of work they had from even the early days and Happy Days, they always had really good chemistry on screen and whatever stage of their relationship they were at. So there's a long history there what they probably figure they bank on, and had a short run.
I think I mentioned it earlier. So Ellen Travolta moves on in Charles in Charge when he does Charles in Charge for after this show for 6 seasons. She played his mother again. So yeah, kept it all in the family, like you said. So just one piece about this false urban legend circulated that the show Joni Loves Chachi was more popular in Korea because Chachi was similar to the Korean word for penis. We needed more Gary Marshall popularity in Korea. So anyway, so that was it. So they all came back for the last season, for the 11th season. All right. So next spinoff, spectacular, is called Blansky's Beauties, an absolute utter failure. Didn't last even a full half season. It was 1977. And so Nancy Walker, who you remember from the paper towel commercials. The brand will come to me in a second.
Bounty, the quicker picker upper.
Bounty, the quicker picker upper. She must have done those commercials for 20 years. So she plays Howard Cunningham's visiting cousin, Nancy Blansky, because of course they all have to be related to that living room. And she's from Vegas. And so she's got a bunch of, I don't know, Vegas whores or something like that. And they build a whole show around that. And it is so preposterous. They cranked out a half a season, like maybe they managed to get 13 episodes before it was canceled. But so yeah, the classic spinoff. Howard Cunningham's cousin, Nancy Walker, plays this Nancy Blansky, and sadly, Lori Beth, Linda Goodfriend, was actually in that, obviously as a different character, as one of these poor Vegas girls that was basically, I don't know, hurled into human trafficking. But you have to. So the whole thing's crazy. I have to. You know what? I'm going to save the clip for a second. I just have to tell you, here's the crossover. So this, again, they never explained how this takes place in the 70s, but of course, Happy Days takes place in the 50s. They just completely washed over it. They had to write in the explanation with Mork and Mindy, but for this, they just said, "Fuck it, we're just not going to address it." It had
to involve time travel,
right?
To work.
So Eddie Mecca, who's Carmine Ragusa on Laverne and Shirley, plays Joey DeLuca, Carmine's cousin or nephew or something like that. Nephew, right? Because he's younger, because it takes place in the 70s instead of the 50s. And then Scott Baio is Anthony DeLuca, who's 12 years old, So this all kicks off just before he comes on as Chachi. So he's still 12 years old, and he's Anthony DeLuca, and then Linda Goodfriend is on it, and Karen Kay, who was actually a great actress. The whole thing was that episode 1 was that Joey DeLuca introduces Nancy Blansky to stunt motorcyclist Pinky Tuscadero. So they got all they had them all woven in there. Yeah. And best part of this is you got to see. So I'm going to play the clip, but you've got to see Scott Baio as this kid. But they had them all in there. So these, they barely had to go outside their circle.
It basically was rinse and repeat when it came to
oh yeah,
the casting.
Oh yeah. They and you know what? I'm sure none of them turned down the jobs. By the way, Nancy Walker was the shit back then. So besides the fact that she was making money hand over fist on the Bounty paper towel commercials, she had just finished her run in Macmillan and Wife, and more importantly was that she had just finished her run on Rhoda, which was wildly successful. That was spinoff of Mary Tyler Moore.
Mm-hmm.
So she was, this was her first one that tanked. So ridiculous. Like, she's such a, she had such a distinct look. Like, I don't think it would play out today. But here you go. You talk about dated. Like nothing is as bad as this.
I'm Sunshine. I'm looking for a man.
It's Lori Beth.
I'm Arkansas, and I'm looking for a tall man. I'm Anthony, and men look for me.
That's Karen Kay.
I'm Anthony. I'm just looking.
He's the same font for the credits for every show.
They're all following Nancy Walker
over the strip.
Yeah, starring Nancy Walker. And there's Eddie Mecca as Joey. Yeah. Scott Baio.
Very young.
More than 12.
And Arnold.
And Pat Morita as Arnold. So there you go.
In the cameo.
Just to round things out. So, I mean, basically she's running a whorehouse. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I was just thinking, like, how would they ever be able to kind of tie this all together to make sense of it? A la George Lucas trying to tie all the Star Wars characters together. So you got Eddie Mecca playing the cousin of himself.
The younger cousin. Yeah.
Younger cousin.
Nephew,
then,
I think. Yeah.
Right. And then Scott Baio. It's almost like the two of them on Laverne Shirley and Happy Days went into a witness protection program and then wound up being these characters 20 years later.
These people are being paid money hand over fist to come up with what's going to be the next winning, combination of cast and story. And so they tie in to Pinky Tuscadero. They tie into Laverne Shirley. They tie into Howard Cunningham. And then, these are the people at the top of the television industry. And, do you think that there was a television network executive who said, yeah, okay, no, I'm following it. Here's what I don't understand is how is Arnold there? Like, how, right. It's 20, 25 years later. How is Arnold there? What's the explanation for that? And they're just like, yeah, fuck it. We just didn't care enough to explain it. Like they didn't care enough to bother explaining it.
They don't explain anything. Chuck Cunningham, no explanation.
Yeah. So that was Blansky's Beauties. Talk about what would hold up or not hold up today. Yeah. So I think it lasted 13 episodes, but that's a colossal insult. But anyway, that Linda Goodfriend as Lori Beth and Scott Baio as Chachi went on to join Happy Days after that winning combination.
Yeah. Well, there was one other spinoff I'm just going to touch on, and it was actually an animated show, a Saturday morning show, but not your cup of tea. But there's a show called The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, and it has a really bizarre premise, which I would explain, but I'm going to leave that to Wolfman Jack. So if you just listen to the opening credits, he explains it all.
I'm ready.
We got it all together now, guys. The Fonz. His doggy name, Mr. Cool, and the Good Group.
They explain all this.
And a future chick named Cupcake. Hey. Oh, now the gang got zapped into that time machine, and they're like traveling through time. My. They do not
And this is why I didn't watch cartoons.
going, but they sure hope to get back to 1957 Milwaukee. Can you dig it? Yeah!
So you got the dog. You got the dog along for the ride. That also does a. This is why I didn't watch cartoons. So they got them all to do the voiceover, right? Anson Williams, Donnie Most, yeah,
all of them. Good money. Didn't have to,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
So I think that had to be at least in part the answer to the whole thing about how with Fonzie's popularity, when they wanted to rename the show Fonzie and the Happy Days Gang, and Ron Howard and Tom Bosley told them to go fuck themselves. This was probably a really cheap knockoff half solution where they could get the kids watching, little kids.
Yeah, get them addicted, and then you have an audience for years to come.
Yeah.
So
last spinoff real quick is called Out of the Blue. It's technically not a spinoff, it's a crossover. And in episode, I don't know, maybe around 6th, 7th season. I think it was 5th, actually. I think it was the season of the wackiness with Mork. Chachi sells his soul to the devil, and he makes a pact. And because he wants to become a debonair, like, older guy. And so they get the actor Jimmy Brogan, who, he was pretty popular back then, and he plays, the character's name is Random. That's his name, the character's name, Random. And he's he's an angel. And so they built a shitty series out of this. I think they may have taped the first 6 episodes, and they only got through either the 2nd or the 3rd. But it's Jimmy Brogan is Random, and Dixie Carter is this mom. She's this single mom in Chicago, because you got to pick a different city. And she's got a couple of kids, and he comes in to, help them through their days. And they considered it not a spinoff, but a crossover, because I guess the Chachi episode with Random aired after the first episode, after the pilot episode aired, on ABC of this Out of the Blue. But I'm going to take 10 seconds and just show you just the beginning of the theme song, because it's just awful. Again, like, people are getting paid to build and introduce shows. This is what they come up with. Whoever came up with the song needs to be like retroactively fired and get their money back. Here we go.
sounds like a porno.
Life is a riddle, you're in the middle, and the puzzle is how you'll survive.
That's it. That's Jimmy Brogan. How do they not get fired just for bad lyrics? It's anyway. That was it. That was the show. So
Great.
less of a spinoff, more of a crossover, but worth mentioning. All right, so that's the end of our spinoff segment. We should mention some guest stars that crossed the screen real quick over the 11 seasons. Besides all the crossovers of Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams and Eddie Mecca and Robin Williams, the only one that I remember of that's notable is Tom Hanks.
Right.
He had a killer episode. He was an old rival of Fonzie's, and so. But I remember that pretty vividly. He went on to he did he had a guest star either once or twice, Tom Hanks, I mean, on Family Ties as Elise Keaton's brother, who was an alcoholic. He was this raging alcoholic who kept getting shit-faced and, and disappointing poor Alex P. Keaton. So yeah, he was the man back then. And then they gave him Bosom Buddies, which we should do an episode on because it had a killer supporting cast.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so before we talk about supporting who kind of wins for best supporting cast member, what else should we cover? How does this all hold up? Charming or offensive? How does the show Happy Days, just Happy Days, and the characters hold up today?
It being a period piece in of itself, it sort of means that it's meant to be a 1950s setting, and therefore the social rules, the societal rules, all were very, very different than they are today. I mean, you're talking about 70 years ago. It's a long time. So I would say most of them don't hold up. And there was actually a few episodes where they touch on some controversial topics, which if handled today would be way different, particularly around racial diversity and even gender equality.
But this show was not tackling that. They were not. Yeah, they weren't hitting it head on. I mean, and you know what? I don't think Gary Marshall was that wasn't his lot in life. That was Norman Lear. He changed the landscape of television completely with All in the Family and Maude, and that was not what this guy was tackling. So, and if he was, I don't know. If nothing else, you would have heard him in interviews over the decades apologizing for using the word Negroes out of Fonzie's mouth. So, yeah.
Right. So to me, it's sort of, you have to look at in that framework, and made today. Yeah, I'm sure the writing would be different. It would be, I'm not sure. If it's Gary Marshall, it's probably kept on the lighter side. But to me, it's sort of frozen in time.
I mean, we have to recognize the fact that it was completely misogynistic show, right? I mean, the whole thing was built around these teenage high school boys who every time anything needed to be discussed or addressed, they looked at the girlfriends and said, all right, girls, go sit over there. All right, girls, you guys wait over here. You girls wait over here. They were utterly relegated to second-class citizens. So it doesn't hold up at all.
No. And the women first Fonzie were obviously sex objects.
Oh, yeah.
We've had a few examples already on this podcast, but it's every episode, right? I mean, nice guy, whatever, but snaps his fingers and they come running.
The girls come running, yeah. And
it's multiple girls usually.
And their solution to being forward thinking was, let's do a spinoff show called Blansky's Beauties, which is literally a whorehouse in Vegas.
Yeah, so they really evolved.
I'm Arkansas. I just love tall men. Yeah, fantastic. I will say, it was supposed to harken back to a simpler time, and it does that. It's really nice to watch. It's really nice to think about the idea that what was going on in the 50s, post World War II, and where every American family should have a house and safety and a safe neighborhood, and it was one of the things that was so endearing about Back to the Future, with Michael J. Fox, and seeing him pop back into that world of simplicity and purity, and I don't know, particularly during these days where we're trying to where our country is rolling back so badly. But basically, charming or offensive, it's offensive.
Oh yeah, I would say on the whole, if you put it under today's rules, absolutely. But I would also say that whether it's a period piece like this or not, the time in which they record, that show was taped or filmed or whatever, the rules, the societal rules at that moment are what people are measuring against.
Yeah.
So inevitably, in 20, 30 years from now, or 100 years from now, the content we produce today, create today, will be judged in the same way. And inevitably, maybe having household pets will be offensive to people in 100 years from now. How dare you incarcerate a wild animal? We don't think about that now.
But 5 minutes later, when they did Mork and Mindy, Pam Darber was awesome. as Mindy McConnell. I mean, she rocked that show. So I think, I mean, when you look at what holds up, like,
Sure.
This wasn't nearly as conscious as it should have been. So
No, absolutely not.
Self-conscious as it should have been. So who was almost cast? I wanted to do who was almost cast.
Yeah.
So who do you have?
So one, Mickey Dolenz, who they had for the Fonz, but he was too tall. He's like 6 feet or so, and they're worried about next to Ron Howard. It would just be.
Can you
awkward.
imagine how that guy's career would have like changed if he had been? Well, the show wouldn't have worked with him as the Fonz, but
the show probably wouldn't have lasted at all.
Yeah.
You can't underestimate. I know you don't. The significant contribution that Henry Winkler made in that character, and the way it really carried it really through the 11 seasons ultimately with with good cast. But
his whole deal was back in the early 70s, very early 70s. He was in a movie called The Lords of Flatbush with Rocky Balboa, and
played by
Rocky Balboa. Yeah, exactly. And he's gone on record where he said he partially modeled Fonzie off of that Sylvester Stallone character for Lords of Flatbush. It was a great movie. I mean, it's not overly rewatchable, but it's a great movie.
Yeah.
So who else?
This was interesting. Richard Lewis actually auditioned for Mark on the same day that Robin Williams did, but they knew each other. I don't know if they were in the same class. And I gathered Richard Lewis auditioned using a Danish accent. And I guess he stopped in the middle of the audition and said, look, Robin Williams is next. He's going to be Mark. Just, don't let this guy get away. That's who you need. And ultimately, he just stepped out of the side. And regardless, Robin Williams would have gotten the role.
And practices Danish elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Curb Your Enthusiasm, where it was more appropriate. Then there was Robbie Benson, who I guess he tried out for Richie, but then ultimately he didn't want the part. And then Dennis Weaver, I guess he auditioned. He was on an early pilot as Mr. Cunningham, and then ultimately wasn't selected. So
Spielberg, who was loosely attached to the to American Graffiti and all of this, he was in that circle. His first movie was called Duel. It was, I mean, just if you're going to sit down and watch it, just have a lot of alcohol ready, because it is the slowest, most boring fucking movie on the planet. But his first movie is called Duel, and it was Dennis Weaver. Dennis Weaver in 1976, like Chevy, just traveling through, sort of like Nebraska or somewhere, and he was being tormented by a big tractor trailer who was just tormenting him for an hour and a half. It's unwatchable, but that's Dennis Weaver. So one more almost cast was John Byner was almost auditioned as for Mark. John Byner was he had a role on Soap, the sitcom Soap. I remember him from this Burt Reynolds movie that from the early 80s that I loved, called Stroker Ace, which has the most fantastic cast. And John Byner had this role in that movie that that was back in the days where when something was on cable, it was on 1,000 times, and so you just kept rewatching it. So I rewatched it, and then I taped it on VHS when I finally got a VCR, and so I remember John Byner's as an actor and a character actor, and he was great. So he wouldn't have pulled off Mark, but interesting that he auditioned for that. All right. So next segment is just major cast changes and any gossip. And I think, the biggest piece to this is the Chuck Cunningham syndrome, which is, that the third sibling, the older brother, his older brother, Chuck Cunningham, notoriously disappeared from the canvas. That's what they call the Chuck Cunningham syndrome, and it's played out in shows ever since, where they just decided that after he just didn't have a role there. I think Gary Marshall just said it straight out, yeah, Fonzie plays the big brother, we don't need him, and that was it. They just wrote him out going off to college, and then by the time the last episode aired, with Joni and Chachi getting married, Howard made reference to his two children. So they're just they just didn't even bother, pretending at that point.
Right.
So that's the Chuck Cunningham syndrome. It's happened a few times. I think Family Matters, there was some extra sibling, a younger sister. There was just no reason to ever include her, nothing to ever write about her, and she just disappeared one year and never came back.
Yeah, they had Urkel. What else did they need?
Right. Yeah, it just, but you follow the pen. You got to follow the story. You got to follow the popularity, and that's what happened. The only other time I remember it happening was all the way back in the early 70s was All My Children, which ran over 40 years, and they had this sort of similar syndrome about this character named Bobby Martin who went up to the attic and never came down. So there's this long running joke about that you go up to the attic and you never appear again. That was it. That was his last line, was I'm going up to the attic, and they just never bothered writing for him again. So the only other gossip around this was the friction between Henry Winkler and Roz Kelly, Pinky Tuscadero, and that Scott Baio dated Erin Moran for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that was it. So any special episodes tonight on a very special episode?
There's a couple. Well, there was one episode, Joni gets rescued, where we see Carmine Ragusa make a guest appearance to help fight off a gang that's basically abducted Joni. Well, they're initiating Joni into the gang, and its a whole premise is pretty bizarre because the gang sneaks into the high school through the window after hours because they couldn't possibly go anywhere else to meet and have an initiation.
Mm-hmm.
And then Fonzie happens just to be there along with Richie Pazzi and Ralph to confront them, but then Fonzie pulled out a secret weapon, which is Carmine Ragusa, which I guess he was like the Golden Glove fighter of Milwaukee.
Yeah, he was a boxer. Yeah, he was a boxer and a ballet dancer.
So he kind of mixes the boxing
and who isn't really
the boxing and ballet in one scene, and it's like a train wreck watching the scene. But I thought it was thoroughly enjoyable. So let's have a look at that.
But before you play it, I'll just say, I remember at least a couple of times where they had to rescue Joni besides that. So they had to rescue her once. They were on like a dude ranch, and she was on like this, what do you call it? Where, some kind of a horse and buggy thing, and it was running away. And so they, and it's great because they play the Happy Days music as she's being rescued, and it's, you get all caught up in it. It's really nice. And there was some point where later on, she's like after college, and she's a teacher, and Fonzie's got to rescue her because one of her students is traps her in a classroom. So yeah, poor Joni was always getting rescued. So let's see.
Just relax, kid. I'm telling you, we got the okay to use the school.
Well, then why did we come through the window? Are you sure there's a party here?
Well, we got a special surprise for you. You're gonna be initiated into the Red Devil. You get to be in the gang after you neck with each and every Red Devil. You see, we do everything together. That's right.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's nothing personal, but I don't even kiss on the first date. I don't think I want to be a Red Devil after all, so I'll just be going. Listen, I have a lot of homework.
And Richie steps in.
Get away from my sister!
Bucko.
Richie, am I glad to see you? How'd you ever find me?
I saw their motorcycles out front.
Get lost.
I'm going to. And I'm taking my sister with me.
Yeah.
You have to get through my boys first.
That's right.
Feels a little West Side Story like,
Well,
even in West Side Story, they called it rape.
Do, but I just want you to know that you're dealing with Iron Dukes Cunningham. Just never know. Can't make any guarantees, but one of these iron fists just might land on one of your mouths.
Throw him in a locker.
Right.
Fonzie.
Yeah. Full applause.
Well, if it ain't the turkey and his feathers. Take it easy. Take it easy. There's 8 of us.
Get over here. Get over here, Shortcake. You went pretty heavy on the icing there, huh? Iron Dukes, I think you did an incredible job here. I just thought maybe you might need some extra help, you know.
Oh, well, I can always use an extra hand.
You're gonna need a lot of extra hands. You're a little outnumbered.
That's right.
Potsy.
Ralph not wanting to come out of the locker.
The door was stuck. The door was really stuck, Fonz.
How did you guys know where I was?
Well, Becky told me where you were.
Yeah, I guess you had to beat it out of her.
I guess I had to kiss it out of her.
Well, this is your gang?
That's right.
3 high school punks? What are they gonna do? Throw chalk at us?
The best part.
Not exactly. See, they're here to carry you out. See, an old friend happened to come and visit me.
You know I go from rags to
The big ragu.
I'll tell you something. I love your feet. You know that? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Carmine Ragusa.
Of the Marjorie Ward Dance School? What's he gonna do? Tango us to death?
Carmine Ragusa is also Golden Gloves champion of Milwaukee.
Oh, that Carmine Ragusa.
That's right.
Excuse me while I warm up for a second.
Yeah.
You ready now?
Yeah, I think I'm warmed up here.
How about you, huh?
You gonna warm up?
I'm warm.
Wait, stop it!
Joni, you get over there by the stands.
No, this whole thing is my fault, and I don't want everybody hurt just because I did a dumb thing.
She's making sense.
Yeah. All right? If you want to be stupid, then fight. I'm going home. But on the way, I'm stopping at Jenny Piccolo's and give her a punch. Get him
All right, now, just before we start, Richie, Potsy, Ralph, retire yourself.
Right, Fonz. Anything you say, Fonz.
Hey, wait a minute, Potsy, Ralph, come here. Don't you see what's happening here? We're almost 18 years old, and Fonzie still fights all our battles for us. Fonz.
Yeah.
Do you realize I've only had 2 fights in my life? One of them was with a department store sales lady. This is one fight that we're gonna handle ourselves, right, guys?
I guess. Yeah, right.
All right. Now you just pick out 3 of your toughest guys.
Oh, come on. I'll pick out 3 of my weakest.
Better.
Okay, Red, listen, if you want to fight this battle on your own, you go right ahead. That's cool as a moose, you understand? We'll sit this one out. That goes for you, Herbie, and little Leroy over there. You sit down.
What? You expect me just to sit around?
That's right. How'd you like to lie around?
Oh, well, I'll just sit back over
Sit down.
They go into the fight scene and all that, but it was just an interesting scene, and particularly having Carmine come in with the whole ballet thing. It's just hilarious.
My favorite part is Potsy deciding that he's gonna, show up to a rumble in a cotton blue sweater.
I know.
Yeah. It's it's hysterical. But that was it. That was, you wanted to see that stuff. You wanted to see cool Carmine, show up and get into a brawl with with him and Fonzie teamed up. What was cooler than that? Yeah. So those were the special episodes, and then there was one of the most memorable, which was the Jump the Shark episode. Which is where which is where the expression came from. The expression was, when does a show go off the rails and just take something way too far? And it all originated when they were, at that on the beach, and Fonzie decides to water ski and jump over a shark water skiing. And I don't what was the most ridiculous part about it, the idea behind him water skiing over a shark, or the fact that he did it in a leather jacket, which just completely reminds me of Batman and Robin, on their Batman on his surfboard with the bathing suit over the bat suit with Adam West. That's what it reminds me of.
What else I noticed about that scene is he jumps a shark off the beach, so it's not like it's in like a tank or something like that. Somehow they were able to trap the shark within a certain part of the ocean and then jump over that part. There's layers of absurdity to that whole episode.
The whole thing is ridiculous.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting too, because the expression is obviously has taken on its own legs, and as you said, even a website and so forth. But if you look at the ratings history of the show, the Jump the Shark episode actually came out in the 5th season, and that's actually when the show was at its height. It was the number 2 show for that season. The following year, they were number 3. That was the year they were tied with Mork and Mindy. It really wasn't until several years later when the show started kind of falling in the ratings. Probably more to do with Richie leaving and being replaced by Ted.
Yeah, I think Jump the Shark was 10 and 15 and 20 years later they started talking about when a show just pushes something too far, and they're like, jumps the shark, and referencing the old Happy Days episode. It clearly wasn't. Fonzie was so popular at that point, whatever. He could have gone up in a spaceship with Mork and it wouldn't have mattered. So
yep.
So all right. So next segment is catchphrases, because everybody had to have a catchphrase back then.
Whoa! Sit on it, Ralph.
You're learning nothing, bucko.
Oh, Howard, are you getting frisky?
Correctamundo. I still got it.
Wah, wah, wah.
Hey.
That was we covered Chachi's, which is wah wah wah. Fonzie obviously used to say correctamundo and whoa and a, and Richie's was bucko and yowza yowza yowza. And you already covered Ralph's, which was I still got it.
Yep.
So what am I missing?
Well, we had Al's as well. Yip yip yip. And
yep.
There was a couple of others. I would say actually, he didn't say it often, but Mr. Cunningham would say Jiminy Cricket once in a while, and but that was it. I don't think Marion really had, other than you could say like Arthur perhaps when she was talking to Fonzie, but it wasn't a catchphrase.
And she'd ask Howard if he's getting frisky.
Yes, there was at least one episode where she did that, but I don't know if that was a pervasive expression. It was just a one time. I think it just caught.
And Arnold used to do the thing where he'd go, zzz, so that everybody would stop talking
and his laugh, right?
Ha ha laugh.
Exactly. So those were. I think we've covered those.
Those are the what you talking about, Willis catchphrases.
Yeah.
All right.
Actually, there is one other one I would just mention, which is "sit on it," which is probably
sit
one
on
of the most.
It, yeah.
And I even have a clip of that.
Sit on it, Fonzie. Hey! Try it out.
Rich, you gotta come home right away, right this minute.
Who died and left her boss?
Sit on it, Mal.
Whoever dreamed that you would have come up with such a good idea?
Sit on it, Howard.
Does anyone say, thank you, Arnold? No. You know what they say?
Sit on it, Arnold.
That's what they say.
Richie, I'm proud of you. You're not a nerd. You're an animal.
Sit on it, Joni.
Anyway, so and on. But it seems like such a silly phrase, but again, it works.
Yeah, I know it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah. So that's catchphrases.
All right, we've got our Love Boat and Fantasy Island segment. Do we have a name for that?
I like to come up with let's call it the Love Boat Fantasy Island Vacation Club, because you're thinking cruise, you're thinking all inclusive resort. That's what comes to mind for me. And in this case, as we mentioned earlier, like so many. Love Boat alone had probably over 500 guest stars on it, and almost the entire Happy Days cast, except perhaps Ron Howard and Henry Winkler were on it. That included Anson Williams, Donnie Most, Pat Morita, Marion Ross, who actually I think played a bigger role later, Tom Bosley, Erin Moran, Ted McGinley, who actually ended up being on Love Boat as a regular, right? I think he was a
right.
photographer.
Last 2 or 3 seasons, or
Yep.
1 or 2 seasons. Yeah.
Yep. Al Molinaro, Scott Baio, Crystal Bernard, Linda Pearl.
I
all
remember
on it.
the Scott Baio episode because they paired him up with Jill Whelan, Vicky, the
Right.
Captain Starter, when they were like younger teenagers, maybe they were, 12 or 15 or something. And that was, he came on as, they sort of paired them up together. So they were all on it. Every one of them was it. Love Boat and Fantasy Island. All right. So how and why did the show end? Season 11, things were sort of trailing off. They didn't get renewed. Joni and Chachi are back for the 11th season, and that obviously didn't cure the ratings issue. There was a little bit of a spike when Richie and Ralph came home from, they came home from the army, and they got him back for like 1 episode, and it was this whole thing about Richie going, disappointing his parents because he wasn't going to stick around Milwaukee. He was going to Hollywood to be a screenwriter. And Ralph Malph was going back to he was going to like optometry school so that he could go into practice with his father.
Right.
And that was it. And so even with the casting stunt, I guess they couldn't fix the ratings issue. So I guess the network decided that was it for the last season.
Yep.
There was that last episode. Really at that point. MASH had set the standard of how you wrap up a show. MASH had been on for 11 seasons and had the most watched episode of the time. I don't remember the numbers, but it was, I absolutely remember tuning in to watch this like 2.5 hour finale of a 30-minute, would-be comedy. And so I don't think Happy Days nailed it like that, but they had an hour-long series finale, and it was the marriage of Joni and Chachi, and Ron Howard did stop in. I think he either didn't have any lines, or maybe his only line was something like "Hi Fonz" or "Hey Fonz," or it was something specific and deliberate, like they didn't want to steal the spotlight. He didn't want to steal the spotlight. He was a mensch, So he either, I think he only had one line in the whole thing, and he just shows up late with I don't know, presumably with Lori Beth.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
So that was it. It was just it limped along for its last few seasons, and that was it. So 11 seasons. That was long enough for sure.
I would say so.
So this is what's egregious was last episode, no Ralph and Potsy. Anson Williams was on the show in the credits for all 11 seasons, and they couldn't squeeze him into the last episode because they only had whatever, what do you have, 38 minutes out of 60 for an hour-long episode. And between Al Molinaro and Al's cousin or brother playing the priest, which was a recurring thing, and squeezing him in, and you had to get Arnold in there for a few minutes, and you had to give a couple of lines to Roger Phillips and Jenny Piccolo.
Mm-hmm.
So no room for Ralph and Potsy. That's not right.
No, they should have absolutely been there. I mean, it's not like they were off the show after season 4. They were a mainstay. So
not nice.
Shit happens.
So that was it. So they wrap up the show. By the way, there were 2 reunion specials. There was a Happy Days reunion special in '92, and then a Happy Days 30th anniversary reunion in 2005. So, I mean, you're talking about a show that went off the air in 83, 84, I think. And here we are, 35 years later, still talking about it. It's unbelievable.
Yep.
All right. So next segment is our most important. It's Best in Show. Who earns the top spot for the most developed, influential, popular supporting character? What do you got?
I got Marion Ross, and this was sort of I was not veering towards her initially, but after watching these clips and seeing how she evolved from the first episode, from the first season to the end, she just had such great delivery, such great timing, and I really enjoyed just the way she would take over a scene when she wanted to. And I grabbed the clip of one example of this, and it's the scene where Arnold announced he's going to marry his pen pal Momo from Japan. This is fairly early on, and Fonzie's asked to be the best man, but Fonzie's got this whole shtick about the Fonzarelli curse, and it's broken apart a couple other weddings before that, so he didn't really want to do the role, so be the best man, and he's trying to get out of it, and they're having this discussion naturally in the Cunningham's living room, and Mrs. C's having none of it.
The only shot that those two people have is if I stay out of it. The Fonzarelli curse cannot be broken. It's ridiculous to try. That's it, that's all, and that's goodbye.
Fonzie, sit on it.
Whoa. What's funny is Henry Winkler can't really hold a straight face for that.
No.
What did I just hear?
I think we should just all calm down and...
I'll handle this, Howard.
Yeah, shut up, Howard.
You heard what I said. I understand about your curse and all that, and I know you're the Fonz with the hey and the whoa, but you are the best man, and you have an obligation as that best man, and you cannot shirk your obligations. Even the Fonz cannot stand in the way of true love, and you have got to talk to Arnold, if you get my drift, and that's all, and that's it, and goodbye.
Fantastic.
Guts.
I think I'm gonna have to hit her.
No, you're not going to hit my wife.
Oh, yeah? Well, then I'll hit you.
You can't hit my dad.
All right, I'll hit you.
You can't hit my son.
Well, I gotta hit somebody. You know where Potsy is?
So I just felt like that to me encapsulated Marion at her best, and that's my choice.
So I really put it under a magnifying glass, and there was a minute where I was leaning towards Erin Moran, because you could almost argue that the show was written from her perspective from the beginning, in the opening scene all the way to the end of the last scene of the last episode of the 11th season. And she endured beyond Richie. You could make an argument that she kind of tied all the characters together, but she doesn't quite win it, but they did well developing her. I could almost make an argument for Scott Baio, not for the same reason. It wasn't shot from his perspective, but he was like wildly popular.
Yeah.
And career-wise, arguably, he found the most success after this show. With his sitcoms that, and even Diagnosis Murder. He really never stopped working. Pat Morita never stopped working, and going on career-wise to get nominated for an Oscar and to be in such successful theatrical releases. But in the end, I came to the same conclusion, that it was Marion Ross. I had a couple of years ago, she was she wrote this autobiography, we mentioned it earlier, and just realizing what a strong central character she was, and how she anchored everybody together, and how that character changed and developed and grew over that decade. And in the end, she had everybody wrapped around her finger, and it wasn't just in a matriarchal way. It was she was rock solid, and I credit the actress, and even today in interviews, she it still shows right through the screen, right through her voice. She's got a very commanding presence. Yep. And so she wins for me. She wins for best supporting character.
Yeah, and actually interesting enough, my second and third was Pat Morita and Scott Baio. So there you go. Great minds think alike.
that's it. So we're making it through our first episode. Let's end with that clip from the final episode, the final scene where Tom Bosley breaks the fourth wall and kind of looks to the viewers.
Well, what can I say? Both of our children are married now, and they're
Sorry, Chuck.
starting out to build lives of their own. And I guess when you reach a milestone like this, you have to reflect back on what you've done and on what you've accomplished. Marion and I have not climbed Mount Everest or written a great American novel. But we've had the joy of raising two wonderful kids and watching them and their friends grow up into loving adults.
Except Potsy and Ralph, because they're not there.
We're going to have the pleasure of watching them pass that love on to their children. And I guess no man or woman could ask for anything more. So thank you all for being part of our family.
Looking straight at the screen.
To happy days.
To happy days.
I forgot about Spike.
Spike made it. Yeah, that wasn't a particularly impactful character.
I think they should go back in and edit out Richie's mustache. They did it for Henry Cavill and Superman. So,
yeah.
All right. So ends our first episode, and we'll look forward to listener feedback and on our website and on all of our social media posts.
Yeah. So on our website at castingrecall.com and on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Okay.
So hope to hear from you there. Until next time.
I'll see you on the next episode.
Take care.
Bye.